Everybody, welcome. It's 12 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get this meeting started. It does appear that all of the committee members are here in person. We could start with a roll call.
Chair Sanders.
Here.
Vice Chair Hibbard.
Here.
Committee Member Keller.
Here.
Committee Member Halt.
Here.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen. Here. Committee Member Prince.
Here.
Committee Member Rowland.
Here.
Committee Member Louis.
Here.
Committee Member Tobias.
Here.
All right. Before we do public comments, I see I have about 5. Is there anybody else that has any? Before we start, I just wanted to take this moment, if you will all join me in a word of prayer, please. Dear God, we just come to you this afternoon, Lord, with hearts of thanks and appreciation. We just ask that you guide this public meeting, Lord, with the good intentions that we all have here today. May your blessings be seen throughout the city of Bakersfield and beyond. In your name we pray, amen. With that, I'm going to go ahead and set my timer and call these in the order that they were here. So we will start with Mr. O'Neill, and I will set a timer for 2 minutes. If you don't mind not going over, once you hear the beep, I will ask that you wrap it up.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Rich O'Neill. I'm with a new committee in town, and we call ourselves Sanitation for the Homeless. We're offering a sanitation service and encouraging it to grow. We're here to network with all of you and to introduce the project. And basically what we do is to the homeless downtown, we give them a bag to put the garbage in. I've already tried this for the last 3 weeks. We're funding our own pilot project through the Kern River Parkway Foundation, and it's a 501c3. And the bag is for their trash, but also, I hate to say this, but toilet. Okay, if you've gone camping, you use a plastic bag. Okay, you go to Mount Whitney on that trail, you have to have a plastic bag with you, and you have to carry it out. This is what we're suggesting in a kind way to the homeless. And the homeless downtown, I've approached them. I saw a couple of these orange bags laying with garbage on F Street, and I also have some photos of one homeless guy carrying an orange bag on his cart, his shopping cart, and it was full of trash. And I verified that with him, took a photo. And but it's a cheap way, and it's just a pilot. We don't know if it's going to work or not. Just like the shelters, we don't know if it's going to work or not. But we're going to try it. And I would like you to know about it. And you see those orange bags around? It's a lot easier to pick up an orange bag than going around and picking up scattered trash all over the place. And they're defecating on my own property downtown, and I want to help them, and it would help me. Is that my time is up?
Yeah.
Oh, that goes by so fast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Appreciate it.
cooperation.
No idea.
And we have your flyer, so thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Mr. Bingham.
Yes, I'm Curtis James Bingham, senior servant of our Lord and Savior God Almighty Jesus Christ, who truly is the only begotten Son, Holy Heavenly Father God. I'd like to say to our First Lady, Ms. Sanders, and the rest of the board, the Lord told us to bless our leaders. You have some people sit on boards for one meeting, they pay $50,000. Some speak just for one sermon, get $100,000. You guys are doing it for free, so it shows a good character that you guys have. And so I pray God bless you. Also, when you're making decisions or do something positive and keep people safe, you want the best word. The Lord told us before anybody here was born that in the last days it's going to get worse and worse, and it is. He said if he don't cut the time short, no flesh would be saved. You can see this evil running rampant. People say, let's have a good future. How are you going to have a good future? Bakersfield doing good. We got freeways. We're building. They got big communities coming in. The only way to have a good future, you have to have law enforcement. And so you have some people, when incidents happen, the first person they're looking at and knocking down is law enforcement. There's no city making it anywhere without law enforcement. This is why the Lord called them his ministers. We have a city council that's blessed. We have a blessed city manager, and we have a blessed mayor, and we have a blessed committee. A God has seen fit to bless, because when you have funds, you can do a lot. Cartels are only cartels because they got money. See, they know we here right now. See, they know we here right now because this is their business. This is how they make their money, by keeping up with our business. They got way more money than law enforcement had. If they had more, they could fight them even more. It's a bunch of crime in here, see? And so we have to recognize the blessing that it is when you take care of your law enforcement and keep them on top, because they the leaders of the city. My conversation is for everybody in this room in this city. We want to be kept safe. I'm not a scary person whatsoever, but it's dangerous out there, and I'm extremely careful. They go after law enforcement now. They didn't used to do that, see? It didn't happen to you, but it can. Satan can't get the same person every single day. You know, this evil is running rampant, and the Lord said it would be. So if you ever want to make sure that you're right, and when you're in your careers, you know you're doing the right thing, when you're keeping the people safe, and you're doing things positive like you're doing. Take the word of the Lord, what he said in the last days, it's going to get worse and worse, and if you don't cut the time short, no flesh will be saved.
Thank you.
So that shows you we need law enforcement, and get as many as we can get, the better. Pray God bless everybody. Thank you, First Lady.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Hightower.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members, and city staff. My name is Troy Hightower, and I wanted to discuss two items in the economic development budget. One is the B3 implementation at 1.7 million. And I've been involved with this B3K, and my understanding is that is a planning effort that the city has already paid for. So I'm not sure what this 1.7 is for. Whether it's for some specific projects, it's not clear. And my understanding that planning process is in process, so I don't know if they have projects. That's one. The other is the community revitalization project at 3 million. We've been working with someone to develop an affordable housing complex in a disadvantaged community, and we feel that it would be eligible. It's eligible for most other funding sources, and we'd like to know what would be the process of how we could either submit or make a request to the city in consideration of using those funds or some of those funds to help us develop the affordable housing project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Ms. Coronado.
Hello, good afternoon, city staff, Measure and Oversight Committee. My name is Joanna Coronado, and I work with TDH Associates. I am following up on the comments made by Mr. Troy Hightower on the April 9th meeting about the proposed TCC projects, the 4th Street Active Transportation Corridor Project, and the Downtown Electric Circulator Bus. Those projects were submitted to the city for possible TCC funding. Since submitting those projects, we have begun work on a new affordable housing project on 4th Street. It has come to our attention that all the proposed projects are eligible for and could be funded in addition to TCC by Measure and Economic Development Funds. The projects would also be eligible for EOA funding under their improved pedestrian connectivity, such as sidewalks and park benches, and enhanced visual characteristics, such as stamped concrete and kiosk. We respectfully ask the committee to support our request to use Measure and/or other sources of funding, such as TCC or EOA for the projects. We appreciate your consideration of our request and would be happy to provide additional information. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Eddie Lane.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Eddie Lane with the Sierra Club. We've had many times we've been before the committee and sent a lot of recommendations, short-term and long-term, having to do with the urban core and with the parkway, the Kern River Parkway. I just want to relay a couple stories today. We were down at the parkway with Mr. Budak and a member of the city police department here a couple weeks ago. We were at, not at San Miguel Grove, which got a lot of attention, but we were at the other park. Mr. Budak, where were we at? Uplands of the Kern. And Uplands of the Kern, we've talked about, I think, for a couple of years. We were at Uplands of the Kern. When we got there for our little tour, there was a van, an old van, on the parkway, on the bike path. And the policeman had to tell the van that if he was back there again, he would be in trouble. So we've got a problem with vehicles on the bike path. Not only vehicles, when we go down there, the same encampments that were there a year ago are still there. It is not a safe place. And we found out, thank you, Mr. Budak, the city put $4 million into that project a few years ago. Now, if the city put $4 million into a project, one would think it would be maintained. It's not maintained, and it's not safe for the public. So before any money goes to beautification of highways, money needs to go to the projects that have already been created by the city for the public's use. Second example, I saw my friend John Bedingfield. He has a shop on right down by Highway 99 I want to say Manor, that's not right, but by Highway 99. But I went to see him last Friday. His shop and 4 others along there, it's near California. His shop and 4 others have been vandalized. In front of his shop was a car that was burnt out by the homeless. We need to take care of those issues before we put any money into beautification for highways. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lane, and for the record, we did receive over your email photos that you sent in. All right, that was our last public comment. If the committee will please review the minutes from April 9th. Anyone up for making a motion?
Committee Member Louie, I make the motion to accept the minutes from
April
April 9th.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Perez Andreessen was the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Well, do you want to do a roll call?
Oh.
Yeah.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Member Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Committee Member Holt,
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Committee Member Prince,
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland,
Yes.
Committee Member Louie,
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Clegg, if you guys would like to take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Chair and committee members. We're going to begin with our departmental presentations. Instead of starting where we left off at the last meeting, we're going to save the portion on some of the council strategic initiatives towards the end of this because it flows well into our wrap-up statement. So we're going to begin with development services this morning and hear from Mr. Chris Boyle, and we'll go from there.
Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be before you today. Your first presentation today is on the Development Services Department, fiscal year 21-22 PSVS budget. A little bit about Development Services for beginners. Development Services is made up of 2 separate divisions, the Building Division and the Planning Division. Code Enforcement is a section of the Building Division. There's currently 78 employees within the department, and as part of the overall budget for fiscal year 21-22, there is a request to raise that number to 91 employees. As part of my ask to you today for your support, there are 10 employees requested. Now, when we look at the overall number counts as part of the overall department, if approved, myself and support staff accounts for 4 individuals, including my business manager. The planning division is 17 employees. The building component of the building division is 29 employees. Enforcement, if approved, will rise to 41 employees total. This presentation will be broken into a review of both the planning and the building divisions separately. There'll be a discussion on return on investment, on the justification for those requests, the realities of need, and the costs of those requests specifically. When talking anything about the planning, the public safety vital services measure, and in a discussion with you, the focus is always going to be on those 13 original goals, and perhaps no department has a greater role in helping to realize those goals, whether acting as support for the police department, facilitating the efforts of the Economic and Community Development Department in terms of development of affordable housing, other in-house issues like addressing homelessness, code enforcement, improving our neighborhoods, and stimulating economic development through the normal construction trades of the city. The Development Services Department has significant return on investment within those organizations and in realizing those goals. But let's talk about specifics, and I'll be as brief as I can, but I don't want to ignore the fact that my staff throughout the pandemic has worked. We missed 4 hours because the governor said that we were closed down, and so half my staff didn't come to work on the day after the original governor's proclamation. But aside from those 4 hours, Development Services has been here, delivering development services to the citizens of the city of Bakersfield with a focus on exemplary customer service and a fair and equitable application of ordinances. That said, we processed more entitlements during a pandemic year than we processed in the year before, including a plethora of use permits, rezones, general plans, tentative tract maps. We did 100 site plan reviews within the city during a pandemic year. This is at a time when many departments had no public presence whatsoever. Over that time, we also completed the general plan strategy and options report, and from that released an RFP, a request for proposals for a comprehensive general plan update. We have RFPs on the street for climate action plans, for municipal services review, for a housing element update. We're trying to wrap up the Metropolitan Bakersfield Habitat Conservation Plan while implementing a new Bakersfield Habitat Conservation Plan, and a draft right now is with state and federal agencies. There's been a renewed effort on the part of annexations. We've had 8 completed annexations over the course of the fiscal year, and we probably have at least that many in process. Had multiple zoning ordinance updates per council direction, whether that's housing element cleanups or dissolving the BZA or downtown or landscaping enhancements within the ordinance. We're currently processing 1 EIR from McAllister Ranch. We have larger projects like the Mill Creek Master Plan for a downtown entertainment district expansion, Bakersfield Commons, which has been in the paper recently, the Gateway Project that acts as a gateway to our southern door. We haven't been bored. And on top of that, we're actively engaged in beginning a multi-year, 3 to 5 year process for a general plan update. Add to that, that includes a housing element update, and I don't have enough fingers and toes to identify all of the various state statutes that must be accounted for within that housing element. As you know, housing is a priority with the state of California right now. So what's my request? My request is for 2 associate 1-2 planners. They would be specific to long-range planning efforts. Not one other single effort is connected more with PSVS goals or would lead to completing those PSVS goals. It sets the table for literally the next future of Bakersfield. It's a 20 to 25-year planning document, which is indicative of a 3 to 5 year planning framework for its adoption and its supporting EIR. Includes major integrations with state law throughout every general plan element. Currently, PSVS supports 1 Associate 1 and 1 DS Tech, which largely functions as an analyst for us within what is considered a generational effort. You know, the future is now. I did a quick review. It's not in your slides, but I just had to. On Friday, I called some colleagues in the city of Fresno. We oftentimes compare ourselves to Fresno. We have on staff right now a total of 10 planners. That includes a planning director who has an active hand in the day-to-day operations of the department. He has to. Within the city of Fresno, there are 26 planners, 26, plus additional support staff. Of those, 2 of those planners are largely administrative. Those are the 2 division heads for advanced and current planning. Again, the future is now. Major effort. My ask is for those 2 planners. That comes at a cost of about $200,000 in hard recurring costs and a total cost of about $213,000. There's a $12,000 cost just in setup costs for desks and computers and equipment and the like. I'm asking for your support. Let's talk about the building division and its realization of those same goals. You know, last year, during a pandemic year, as it relates to single-family residential development, I noted that there was recent data out today that the entire state only issued something like 103,000 new single-family permits last year. So literally, my city accounted for 1.5% of that in total. We processed, well, we're on pace to process about 1,650 single-family residential units. And that would be a 30% increase over the year prior. And that's done during a pandemic. At the same time, we have about a 3.3% increase over 1920 in the 2021 data as well. So indicative of strong development throughout all of the segments of development within the community. I wanted specifically, though, to talk to you about my code enforcement team. My ask today is for employees specific to code enforcement. Total responses for calls for service increased from a total of 9,000 plus, call it 9,350 in 2019 to 11,700 in 2020. That's a 25% increase on calls for service. The RRT responded to 4,375 of those total calls, 12 calls per day on average for the RRT. That's a 205% increase over 2019, where we experienced 1,434 calls. The RT cleaned up 1,293 sites. It removed 3,749 cubic yards of trash and debris. Just this past weekend at San Miguel, we removed another 400 to 500 cubic yards of debris from the river. The RT made 1,047 contacts with homeless population, collaborating with flood ministries, and RT has been instrumental in the referral program to the BLNC, the Bakersfield, the Brundage Lane Navigation Center. The code enforcement section addressed 122 individual council referrals during the fiscal year for 2021 as of just April 15th. And of those referrals, 90 of them have been closed. Put that in context to before Public Safety Vital Services. I just checked my records, and in 2018, there were a total of 6 referrals. Mindful, 122 referrals this year. And of the last 3 years before PSVS came along, there was a total of 23. I want to thank you for your support of the 3rd RRT team. Right now, we're working on standing that up and getting that going. I'd like to say that some of the things that have been supported even in the first year as part of phase 1, they're not quite here yet. The build times for many of the equipment that we count on to be most effective has been extensive in no small part because of the pandemic, But we still have gone and found used vehicles that we could lease and bartered with other departments like parks for the use of other equipment, so we could maximize our efficiencies in the field. So the 41 that I've proposed includes the 5 that were added to create that third team. And I would note that third team really does allow us to have, once they're hired in the field, allows us to have 2 teams working at the same time, Monday through Friday, with teams also available on Saturday and Sunday. So in my ask, which I'm getting to, these are strategic expansions to address council priorities. And this really is an evolutionary process in terms of building a code enforcement and RRT staffing to be reflective of new realities. In 2018, I had a staff of 11, and that was plenty to handle 6 council referrals. I have 122 referrals today. We work in a different reality. There are different expectations of council. There's different expectations on the part of the city as well coming out of PSVS. And it's our job to try and realize and satisfy those expectations. So what are my asks today? When you build a team of 41 employees, that places a great burden on management in terms of maximizing their effectiveness and their utility in the field. It places additional responsibilities upon the city as well. So I'm asking for a code enforcement manager to oversee all of code enforcement, including the rapid response team. And I'm also asking for a supervisor too. You know, we're adding a lot of equipment, and that equipment comes with specialized requirements, and it's important that we make sure that our teams have all the required trainings specific to equipment operation and the like, and that supervisor would be specific to those light equipment operators and service maintenance workers that are on the cleanup side of RRT, whereas the code enforcement side is doing that outreach effort with flood and the like, trying to develop connections with the homeless community and to provide for referrals to BLNC. So those are the rationales for those two supervisorial positions, and they're uber important in terms of us being able to maximize the team that you've been supportive in us building. On the other side, I noted that there was 11 code enforcement officers in 2018, and today we have essentially 11 code enforcement officers out there in the field. We've had part of that is we would have 13 if it weren't for we're having some difficulties in finding qualified staff. We're not that right person to be out there representing the city. So that said, staff is trying to catch up with the realities of a large city today, and we're asking for funding for 4 additional code enforcement officer 1, 2, but we'd also like to have 2 assistant code enforcement officers so we can grow our team in-house, since we're having troubles with finding qualified individuals to step in at a CE 1, 2 level. That allows us to mentor individuals that may not be quite ready for a full code enforcement position, but with the right training and the right seasoning can promote into that position. We see it as a successionary strategy that will lead to more success in our recruitments. How do I justify an ask for 8 code enforcement officers? Well, look at the data before you. It's staggering and compelling as it relates to a quick comparison of other cities. You know, if we wanted to stay focused on Fresno, and I don't know whether that's a fair approach, but if we wanted to, we would see that Fresno has 62 code enforcement officers per our survey of comparable cities. We have, again, essentially the same staff we had 200 in 2018 with quite a different mission that they're asked to complete. But even if we looked at the average of all responding comparable cities, we don't look good. We have 1 code enforcement officer per each 23,620 residents in the community, where the average is 1 per each 14,320. We have 1 code enforcement officer for essentially every 9.5 square miles, where the average is about 3 square miles, 1 per each 3 square miles. So we have nearly twice the number of citizens being served than comparable cities, and we cover 311% more of the comparable city's service area. I see that as compelling evidence in support of growing my code enforcement division such that it can realize the very lofty goals that have been placed before this department, not just by the Public Safety Vital Services Oversight Committee, but by the council as well. What does that look like in terms of costs? There's about $800,000 in recurring costs associated with this ask, with a total cost of about $1.45 million. I think it's money well spent. Overall, for the entire ask from Development Services, the total cost is about $1.36 million. And of that, about $1 million is a recurring cost. $200,000 in the planning side, about $800,000 in the building or code enforcement side. The larger gap is largely for equipment purchases as it relates to code enforcement, which needs trucks as opposed to sedans and things along those lines. That said, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to ask you for support in this request. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do any of my committee, go ahead, Barry, you want to start?
Thanks for the breakdown on it. The questions on the planners with the general plan update and some of those one-time events, did you look at the possibility of outsourcing that versus hiring people? Because do you have enough work once those things are done? Those are a strain on the system today, but will there be a strain once those projects are complete? Although our city continues to grow, it's just the continued adding of overhead that doesn't go away is the challenge. Whereas for those fixed projects, for $200,000 a year, you could get a really nice consulting group of not 2 people, but probably 4 or 5 with lots of comparable city experience to really help redo those long-range planning efforts.
Well, noting that we have requests for proposals out right now, the general plan effort itself is going to cost somewhere between $2 and $3 million, and that would be largely facilitated through consultants. City will be able to draw on an administrative cost as it relates to that, but all of the efforts associated with a consultant's efforts aren't isolated to what that consultant does. The first year of this effort will be largely focused on building community census with a vision for Bakersfield into the future. Be tremendous staff pressures in terms of organizing and staffing meetings with various stakeholder groups and looking to build that consensus. The work that that staff will do is also not just isolated to general plan update. Although we do have requests for proposals for consultants to complete the climate action plan at a significant cost. There are administrative efforts that are inherent to what staff does in completing large-scale deliverables, and that staffing isn't there right now. Very candidly, I don't come before committees to ask for things just because it makes my life more easy. I look at these as prudent asks, and I look at them as not just a short-term vision of 3 to 5 years, but in terms of a longer-term vision, because that general plan will come out with goals and policies that it will be imperative that planning division staff and building division staff look towards realizing those goals and policies in terms of implementation of that plan. I haven't even touched on the fact that we'll be responsible for the preparation of a zoning ordinance update to be reflective and consistent with those general plan goals and policies. So I think the word for me is I don't believe that the current staff, in fact, I'm certain of it. I would say there's panic in the workplace because just in this last year, you have got your money's worth from your Development Services Department in terms of the things that we have done without this staff in place. And with the workflow that's before us, I don't see a strategy, one that's a successful strategy, without your support on these positional asks. I wouldn't ask you if I didn't think they were prudent, and I've done a lot of work in terms of hoping to demonstrate that to you, but that's the reason for the ask.
Thank you. If I may really quickly reflect on some philosophy around development services in particular, because I think it's a fair question, because development cycles are cyclical. You know, there are periods of greater growth and periods of lesser growth. And so we try and take a hard look and see what is the baseline of what we would expect to be sort of the valleys or troughs of that cyclical work, and make sure that we staff up to a minimum that maintains the lows, and then with consultant work on specific projects, or even consultant work, you can do even plan reviews and checks, through consultancy, although we're not doing a lot of that right now, but would look to the cyclical nature of the development cycle to supplement our efforts contractually, whereas maintain that base, that core baseline that we need, and do feel like a modest ask of a couple of planners gets us to a better baseline, but do look to absolutely take into account the cyclical nature of both projects and development cycle to supplement as makes sense.
Thank you, City Manager.
I had a quick question in regards to the planners. You compared us to Fresno at 26 and we have 10. So why just ask for the 2 planners instead of more?
Well, it goes back to that word prudent, and quite frankly, to the city manager's statements as it relates to trying to make sure that we maximize our efficiencies based on our current and our projected volumes moving forward. I can't speak to the city of Fresno as it relates to the productivity of their department. I can only speak to the productivity of the city of Bakersfield. You have a fine department. It just needs a little help right now.
I'd also like to just follow up on that I think these staffing ratios, if you looked at staffing ratios to other comparable benchmark cities, we have 16 benchmark cities in California that we look at as our market comparators, and that you would find that our staffing ratios across the board throughout the city are much lower than just about everyone. I think I shared with this group that coming out of the experience of Stockton, my personal experience limited to certain cities. In Stockton, we had higher staffing coming out of bankruptcy than Bakersfield did before the Public Safety Vital Services tax measure. The good news is Bakersfield is a lean, mean machine and does a lot of really good work with lean staffing. I think one of the reasons that we don't ask for more is because we're trying to stay lean and try and stay efficient. And so we focus our asks on areas like public safety and code enforcement. And you'll see in a pie chart later that that's the vast majority of positions in this third phase are for policing and code enforcement. And so we try and maintain, again, lean operations, even though, again, our staffing ratios might be different. We try and be strategic about where we make those ads that are going to have the biggest return on investment.
Yep. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Mr. Prince, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. My question is around the fact that, do you have goals and objectives that you have in your department based on your actuals, in other words, your current personnel, and in comparison, by adding these additional employees? Have you set goals and objectives where you would like to see your department actually perform at? And do you have anything that you will be able to compare and bring back to this particular committee, let's say next year, in regards to reaching those goals and objectives based on the request that you are making today?
Well, thank you for your question. Within my presentation, you might have noted I ran through a long list of deliverables that the planning department is currently engaged in. And some of those deliverables have been short in coming. I've been here 18 months, and some of them we're doing a super good job on, especially as it relates to customer service and serving that client from a counter perspective. I'd say we've had some fits and starts as it relates to annexations. One of my goals would have been to increase our success in terms of becoming more adept at taking annexations from concept to realization. And so we've been able to improve upon those things. As it relates to the Metropolitan Bakersfield Habitat Conservation Plan, that's been one of my big goals in terms of finishing what has been a multi-year effort and bringing a document to the council that they can digest and make decisions upon. The goals that I have before me and how that staff is utilized in realizing those goals from a planning side really were delineated within the presentation. In terms of code enforcement, be honest with you, code enforcement has a far-reaching role than it had just 2 years ago. I've been here 18 months. I think I started the same week as the first RRT team went live. And so I've kind of evolved with them. But expectations of code enforcement are very different today. Not just from the citizen's perspective, we take in with our HOTS program, which is an app that, the Bakersfield app, you can go in and file a complaint, and the code enforcement team is largely responsible to respond to that complaint if it's pointed towards their way. Add to that the referrals and that we get, as well as being supportive to the rapid response team and addressing homelessness, and you have a tall task to complete with staffing that we have. On the sidebar, I have an additional ask for some additional building inspectors, because sometimes my staff is juggling between making sure that we have adequate inspectors in the field while at the same time addressing code enforcement shortfalls. But by and large, I can only ask them to do all that they can do, and I'm very proud that they do all they can do. But when one of those things get better, there's a trade-off. So I may bring my referrals down to 30, but the amount of backlogged responses as it relates to code enforcement cases goes up commensurately. Today, and for the last year, there really isn't a strategy to really have all those things completed the way we want to complete them, in such a way as we're really delivering exemplary customer service out in the field to all citizens. We do our best with the resources that we have. I'm asking you for additional resources.
Thank you. And I wanted to provide a little bit of context to what a council referral means and what that looks like. Typically, that is a council member pointing out an address or a series of addresses where there is a code enforcement concern or issue from a constituent and asking code enforcement to go and follow up. And some referrals have even been to do some proactive code enforcement along a stretch of a commercial corridor, for example, which is fairly time intensive. And so these referrals that are being referenced, it's specifically, we have areas that that are presumed, and often we find is the case, to be out of code compliance, and it's the effort to clean up the city. And so really, we heard last year a desire for more code officers, even from this committee, and then council said, why don't we just, go big and double the number of code enforcement officers. It was some comments at earlier budget workshops in the fall. And so we took that to heart and said, part of the cleanup of the city, getting to a different standard and cleaning things up, is to have the staff from code enforcement to go out and address those requests and backlogs on quality of life issues.
I have a broad question. I appreciate the presentation. It's probably not aimed at this department, but those numbers are kind of shocking on the staffing levels to see. So, if we're running really lean departments, I think it kind of begs the question, where's the funding going? And where are we pushing it over the years as far as, are there some fat departments out there that maybe we shouldn't be backstopping with Measure N money? Are there departments that have been super lean that we need to be spending money on? It'd be interesting to see that, because the community's not swimming in reserves, or hadn't been before this. So it'd be interesting to, where's the money going if we're so lean?
So I would reflect that it's not that there's been lots of money going someplace else. There has been limited resources all the way around. When I looked at the department budgets last year, as we were trying to tighten up our belts to account for a $28 million loss in revenue across all funds, not just Measure N, I said, okay, where do we go to training budgets? What can we cut there on a one-time basis? Those budgets were already pretty lean. My professional assessment of this organization is that it has been really lean for almost a decade, and that they've continued to try and stretch farther and farther to continue to at least provide the same level of services while the cost of doing business has increased. And so we've had to do more and more with less. And so I don't think that there are fat departments, frankly. I think that absent the Public Safety Vital Services tax, the city would have just continued to limp along. I know there's been some comments about, should we pay for this out of another funding source? The general fund is at its, nearly at its max, and, we see slight increases in the general fund, 2% here, 3% there. The cost of doing business goes up 5% every year. And also, there's just been a number of things that we haven't faced, like the urban challenges of homelessness historically, that absent a new revenue source, we just wouldn't respond the same way we're able to now. That's the motivating part. That's the strategic piece that we're fortunate to be able to do. And so I think it's a good question, but in my assessment of all funds, there are not other departments that have been well resourced. Everybody has stretched pretty thin, and so this is our opportunity to, at least with the new resources, be strategic about where we deploy them. I think everywhere could probably use some help, but we're putting it where it's going to have the biggest impact and address the biggest issues and priorities of the day.
I would add that the word for me really is the prudent utilization of funds. And in this case, the ask before you today really, from all my analysis, lead to it's a prudent request asking for your support.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. I do have a question. Now, the following presentation will be on economic and community development. If they get the funds they want and they're able to accomplish what they want, doesn't that create more work then for you?
I hope so.
And then, but then there'd be the
That
problem
really
with
is
the staffing.
that really is the dynamic, Commissioner, and that I want economic and community development to be successful in their mission in providing additional affordable housing and providing additional economic stimulus, because that's what their job is, and my job is to facilitate those projects going from either a vision to a fundable, buildable project to something that we're cutting a ribbon with the mayor for whatever that project may be. It could be an affordable housing project, could be veterans housing, it could be the repurposing of any one of a number of blighted properties within the city. I don't want to couch any of those potential accomplishments of ECD, because I know they're a very talented team and they can do a lot of things well.
We certainly would want that to happen, of course, but then does that make your prudent ask of the number of people insufficient?
If I may, just one thought about the nature of, I think, what would drive that additional work. So, Committee Member Louie, great question, I think, because we do hope and anticipate increased workloads. The process of processing the different building permits and entitlements and so forth is typically actually funded out of the Development Services Fund, and it's tied to the cost of doing that work, and so it's collected in the permit fees. And so if we do need to increase staffing to process more building permits and, like I said, entitlements and zone changes, there is a process that has a nexus to the cost of doing that business that is collected with the fees, and we can increase staffing even cyclically to that other topic I was discussing earlier, to process that additional work. I think where we ask for support from the general fund or from the Public Safety Vital Services tax measure are some of these more general policy areas that aren't permit supported or permit fee supported. And so like a general plan amendment, which actually does have some support from the permit fees actually, but there are elements of it that have a public good that just helps provide benefit to the overall community. And so we do need to supplement some of the permit-funded activities to develop policies, but just processing more and more permits as more and more economic development happens, that will naturally be able to be supported with increased staffing through those permit fees collected.
I understand that, but there's also, as you say, there's a nexus. If we start charging more in fees, then the applications may not be as numerous as before. I mean, we talk about a shortage of housing and all, but in some cities in Northern California, the development fees just on a single residence are approaching $200,000, which drives the median price of homes up over $800,000 to $1 million, because you've got to pay that $250,000 just to buy land before you can turn the shovel.
And please let me jump in quickly and say for the public viewing audience as well, we're not increasing our fees by any means. Just wanted to be really clear about that. What I was suggesting is if the volume increased and we did more and more of the same permit types, it would just generate enough income to support the increased staffing to cover an increased volume. But we don't anticipate raising fees. In fact, if anything, there is nexus to those fees, but we want to take a hard look always at our fees and making sure that it's as streamlined a process as possible, and that our fees are as competitive as possible. But just if we're successful in community revitalization and we just get a higher volume, that just generates over time more of those same revenues that are at that same price and allows us to staff up to meet those new demands.
I would add too that the ask is specific to the general plan update and the other long-range deliverables that the department is tasked with the next 3 to 5 years initially and into the future in terms of implementation, in all honesty. And so those two positions are clearly aligned with realizing public safety vital services goals. General plan truly is that document that helps guide the city realizing not just the 13 goals that are called out in the original PSVS statements, but in all the goals of the city moving forward throughout all of its divisions.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this side? No? Good, thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you, committee members. Just reflecting on time, we've scheduled ourselves 2 hours here, and we've got several departments to go, and so we'll continue to move as quickly as we can. Our next presentation, Ms. Jackie Kitchen is filling in as our interim director of economic and community development, and will walk us through this one. This one is actually a newer department, and where there's actually a fair amount of some of the new strategic direction, so we will take a bit of time on this one, and then we'll try and move quickly through our other presentations.
Good afternoon, committee members. Good to see you all. It's been a little while. I'm Jackie Kitchen, Assistant City Manager, and as Mr. Clegg indicated, the lucky acting interim ECD Director as well. I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge some of the staff that I brought here with me. Ladies, if you could stand up. These are the 4 pillars of the department right now who are doing all the real work. I'm just here to talk about it. They've been running everything for the last 1.5 to 2 years as this department has evolved from a division to a department. So just wanted to acknowledge them. I will move into a presentation. I will try to move relatively quickly given the time we have today, but if you're comfortable, I would recommend turning so you can see the screen. There is quite a bit of information that I'll run through today. I'll talk a little bit about ECD, how it has evolved in Bakersfield over the last few years, an overall snapshot of the department's budget, and then I'll get into the work of the 3 units within the department as it stands today and our ask for today. So just kind of a reminder of the history. Prior to the dissolution of redevelopment in 2012, the city of Bakersfield did have a full-fledged economic and community development department. There were over 20 dedicated staff who ran a number of programs. The one that's most notable here is the redevelopment agency. We had 3 specific areas within the city of Bakersfield that were targeted for specific reinvestment that was supported through tax increment financing and other powers bestowed upon the city by the state redevelopment law. There were a number of notable capital projects completed during that time, the Mill Creek Linear Park, as well as the administration of a number of federal entitlement programs related to CDBG, home, fair housing, and more. But then redevelopment was abolished by the state, and so that department was eliminated in 2012, and that 20 staff was downsized to about 6. And those staff were placed as a unit within the planning division of the Development Services Department. That's about the time I came on at the city of Bakersfield about 6 years ago. So got to know that staff and the body of work that they were doing. Their duties were fairly limited at that time, mainly related to the remaining administration of our federal entitlement monies. Then in 2018, PSVS was passed. And as you well know, there are 13 priorities associated with our PSVS measure. 5 of those are related to economic and community development type activities, addressing homelessness and improving the quality of life in our community. So back in 2019-20, through that fiscal year, we proposed 2 new programs to support those priorities. One was the creation of a homeless housing initiatives and services program, and the other was the restoration of some of those ED activities that we had had previously. So phase 1 of that evolution was increasing the size of that ED unit within planning to a specific division within the DS department. We were able to restore a couple of the community development positions and add a few economic development positions. Then during phase 2, last year, we completed the transition of that to a full department. The department was just approved with the last budget process less than a year ago in last June. We were able to restore some of the additional staff, and this year I'll be asking for the addition of a housing services unit within the new ED department. So the department, again, has been in place for about 11 months now, and I'll go through some of the things that they've accomplished. But first, I wanted to show you an overview of the department's general budget. Unlike many other departments in the city, the new ECD department is primarily funded through federal entitlement money, state monies, and through PSVS funding. As you'll see here, there's very little general fund money within the department, but I thought it was important to give this context to your committee about what the department does, because many of the things that this department does leverages those monies that we get from federal and state entitlements. So you'll see here in the main PSVS budget for phase 1 and 2, or the continuation of programs from last year, there's a slight decrease in the overall PSVS ask of about $4 million. And that's mainly due to the fact that we no longer need the one-time capital money that we used last year to purchase the CalCOT facility for the Brundage-Lee Navigation Center. So focusing on the ask for today, the phase 3 asks of PSVS, they total about $7 million, and they're spread across the 3 units of community and economic development, mainly related to economic development, and I'll walk through those in more detail. But here's the overall budget proposal for the department. Again, you can see a predominant, very little use of general fund within the department. So looking at the work that the department does, as I mentioned before, the department's been in place for about 11 months. And there are currently 3 units: the Community Development Unit, the Homeless Services Unit, and the Economic Development Unit. The specific job functions of those units are noted there, and I won't go through them all for sake of time, but you will see a theme that at the last bullet for each of those is affordable housing. All 3 units are working on affordable housing in addition to their other duties over the last year. So we'll walk it through those units and what they do in a little bit more detail now, and then we'll talk on some return on investment and some successes that the units have had over the last year, and then we'll move on to the phase 3 ask within each unit. So starting with community development, this unit mainly again focuses on those federal entitlements, so CDBG, HOPWA. These are the programs that you see related to curb, gutter, and sidewalk improvements, park improvements, and more. This is a map here showing the areas where the city has been able to provide funding for those improvements. Curb, gutter, and sidewalk are on the right, working with Mr. Fiddler and his team, and the park improvement projects working with Mr. Budak and his team are shown on the left. In addition to that, this unit works on our federal home entitlement, which is affordable housing funding, and we're now working on the new PSVS affordable housing as well. And I wanted to dig into that a little bit to show you how the funds over the last 2 years have been used. So since 2006, we've been able to support the construction over 1,000 affordable housing units within 2006. And just in the last 2 years with PSVS funds, 328 of those units can be attributed to the PSVS support, and that includes 248 new low and moderate income units and the rehabilitation of about 80 existing units in Bakersfield. In addition to that, the unit is now going to be focusing on creating an affordable housing strategy. And this isn't PSVS supported, this is actually supported by funding from the state through SB2 or a permanent local housing allocation. And I'll just talk about that more in a moment. But first I wanted to show you a map of where those affordable housing units have been located. You'll see here the purple represents federally funded projects. The blue represents the locally funded PSVS projects, and the green represents ones that use a blend of both funds. We're really encouraging our applicants to leverage funding and use federal funding in support of locally funded projects. So this is a snapshot of how that approximately $9 million in funds has been used over the last 2 years. You'll see that there are 6 projects. 2 of them are currently under construction and 4 in development, for a total of about 328 units that are now in progress, thanks to PSVS. So the asks for this unit, remember this is the community development unit, has no new phase 3 requests, but we are recommending a continuation of the $5 million per year in funding towards affordable housing specifically. And then we're also thinking creatively. As I mentioned, we want to use non-PSVS money to support affordable housing. So we are proposing the creation of that new affordable housing unit. And this is mainly federally funded using administrative funds from our federal entitlement and then funding from that SB2 money. This unit will be able to focus fully on the implementation of those affordable housing projects as well as developing that affordable housing strategy. We plan to establish an affordable housing trust fund, which will allow us to use those funds more intelligently, I guess, or to maximize our use out of them so that we can create pots of funding that are available to help offset development fees for affordable housing projects or help with other entitlement work. So now moving on into the second unit, our homeless services unit. This is pretty new for us. These are sort of the buckets of work that unit is working on. I will say that there are 2 staff in this unit presently. We're authorized for 3, but recruitment is a challenge in this field, as you know. It's very difficult to find people that can specialize in this body of work. And I was meeting with my staff this morning, and we have lost several staff over the last year due to promotional opportunities. We've been fortunate enough to fill staff, bring them in, but within about 6 or 9 months, they are poached to another agency because when you come to work for the city of Bakersfield, you are immediately exposed to a vast, wide variety of projects and acquire a pretty unique skill set that's apparently quite desirable by others as well. So I won't go into detail about the different things that the Homeless Services Unit does, but I did want to just give you an overall perspective. As shown in this pie chart here, the unit is currently managing about $45 million worth of projects or other fund entitlements. Only about 7% of that is from PSVS funding. It looks like about $3.4 million there, and that's mainly related to the operating contract for the BLNC. In addition to all of the things that you see happening there, I just wanted to give you a quick update on some of the successes that the Homeless Services Department has been able to work on over the last year. A majority of that money you see is due to an infusion of stimulus funding. Through the CARES Act, we got about $3.2 million that we were able to administer to 790 households for rental assistance. Additional federal come online, and we were able to start a plan in partnership with the county and the Housing Authority in March. And so far, we have about 1,220 applications that have been approved and another 2,300 in progress. And that is for rental assistance and utility assistance. So that's just something that this division is working on as well. In addition to that, we've had several state funding programs come in to help place 40 additional beds at the Mission, to expand the bed space at the Bakersfield Homeless Center, and more. So it's just kind of another look at the change in funding that's come into this particular unit. As we've talked about in the past, the city's historical involvement in dealing with homelessness was to pass through our ESG or our federal entitlement funding each year. That was to the tune of about $250,000 a year. So as you can see, there's been a significant increase in the amount of funding that's coming through the department and that those 2 staff are handling. So some spotlights and some successes over the last year for this unit. As Mr. Fiddler touched on last time, we opened the Brundage Lane Navigation Center. He walked you through a great presentation of the construction, so I won't go over that again, but I did want to talk a little more about the operating and how that's going. So we did establish a referral network, and that's illustrated here, and that includes members of the City Police Department, our City Rapid Response Team, and the City Dedicated Flood Teams. That referral network meets once a week to talk through issues that we're experiencing in the field, and through our dedicated flood contract, we now have actual flood teams and outreach workers that accompany our code enforcement rapid response teams and make referrals into the city. We do have cards that we hand out, and we provide these to other businesses throughout the city. If you see one that you'd like to be someone that you'd like to refer to the Brundage Lane Navigation Center, you can call Flood, and we'll get the process started. And then here's a snapshot of the occupancy at Brundage Lane Navigation Center. We currently have between 110 and 115 clients in the shelter. We did have a slight dip in February due to COVID, but as of March 31st of this year, we have served over 467 individual clients. 283 of those were male, 184 were female. And at this rate, we do anticipate that we'll meet our 150-bed occupancy probably by June or late July, kind of depending on weather as well. These are some of the things I already mentioned, some of the other accomplishments of the unit over the last year. And again, that's helping complete the 40-bed expansion at the Mission, a 70-bed expansion at the Bakersfield Homeless Center, partnership with the local homeless collaborative, and more. So the Phase 3 requests for the Homeless Services Unit are a slight increase in the annual operating budget for the Brundage Lane Navigation Center. That increase is about $265,000 to bring their total annual operating budget to about $3.1 million. This increase is to address animal care need. From day one, we knew we wanted to be low barrier and that we were welcoming to pets, partners, and possessions, and pets has been tremendously popular. We filled our pet space very quickly, and so we're working with several local agencies to bring veterinary care and others to that facility for those pets, and so that's a majority of this budget increase. There has been discussion as well about potentially increasing the capacity of Brundage Lane Navigation Center. It's currently set at 150. We do have the physical space to potentially double that. That was part of the concept in purchasing the facility. However, we don't anticipate bringing forward a request to increase that capacity until we work closely with our operator to truly understand what their capacity is and what the need is in discussions with the local continuum of care. If we do decide or do find that there is a need to expand bed capacity, we would likely come back at mid-year with a full update and full analysis of what that would look like. We would also want to engage with the community to get their feedback and make sure that we've been a good neighbor to the residents in the area. So moving on to the last unit, last but not least, economic development. These are the programs that unit is starting to operate. They fall within 4 broad buckets: redevelopment, business assistance, marketing and new business, and neighborhood revitalization. There's some details in your slide here about what those sub-programs entail, but I did want to touch on a few of the successes of this newly formed unit over the last year. We were able to implement the online site selector tool, which allows potential businesses, folks looking to expand, to go online and go into one-stop shop and find a website that links you with available properties based on zoning, entitlements, and other things. We also were able to launch our Economic Opportunity Area program. This is kind of our version of a tax increment finance grant program. It doesn't quite have the same muscle as the RDA program did back post-2000 or pre-2012, but we were able to award 6 grants over the last year, totaling about $226,000. These were for site improvements, business relocation, and development assistance for local businesses. One other thing that's not PSVS related, but this unit has been working on is CDBG business assistance programs. So through the CARES program, the city was awarded several $1 million, and we've been able to work with consultants. We've hired the best that we can find to help us manage these programs, and the staff is managing the consultant, and to date, we've been able to administer micro-enterprise grants, and we currently have 274 applications in progress for our loan-to-grant program. One other thing that was mentioned earlier today that I wanted to touch on was the sort of biggest project of the ED unit at this moment, and that's the preparation of the economic development strategic plan for our city. So we hired the Nadelson Dale Group, and we've been working with them to prepare a market analysis and economic outlook for the future of our city, a strength, weaknesses, opportunity analysis, and then really looking and diving deep into finding out what our target industry should be, where we should be focusing our economic development unit or efforts in the future. And this plan is scheduled to be completed in summer of this year and will really act as the blueprint for the department going forward, will help us in establishing a strategic plan for the department, help us understand what we need to focus on. We're also working in partnership with the B3K group, and our consultant has been working very closely with the Brookings Institute on that work as well. So I'll get to the Phase 3 requests for the ED unit, and those are outlined here. You'll see most of these requests are a continuation and an enhancement of programs that were already approved as part of Phase 1. So we are recommending that the EOA plan be funded again for an additional year, and that's $100,000 for each of the 7 plan areas. We are recommending that redevelopment and urban revitalization be funded again. And then we're asking that the $85,000 that we budgeted for the B3K community partnership last year be increased to about $1.7 million for implementation of that ED strategic plan. And this will help the staff provide funding, incentives, and other programs to help ensure that we're able to capture those target industries that come out of that report. In addition to that, we are recommending an increase in the ED consulting contracts. As Mr. Hibbard noted earlier, we recognize the need to be nimble in economic development and bring in consultants, experts, and technical folks whenever possible to help us truly understand and strategize on where we go next as a city. We're also recommending $3 million for the community revitalization program, and then we are requesting 2 additional staff members to help with the implementation of these things. So with that, this table summarizes the Phase 3 requests today, and I'm available if you have any additional questions.
Thank you. Any questions on my left? Comments? We'll start with Mr. Hibbard.
Thank you. Very complete. And in my mind, economic development is really simple.
It is.
Take care of the capital. If people are willing to invest in our community, you have to make it easy for them. I'm not seeing a lot here that really focuses on, and I think it really makes the case for Mr. Boyle's department, that's where the focus needs to be for economic development, in my opinion. I am not a fan of spending any money on a computer system that helps people identify properties, because I think there's other sources out there that already do that very well. And I think it's too hard to keep up on that changing environment. But if the counter person or the first people they come in contact with aren't well trained and don't have a customer service mentality, meaning they recognize that their salary is paid by the person that's bringing that set of plans or that question or whatever it is on the phone, we are wasting our time. And so I am encouraged to see a lot of the thought, but I'm also concerned that we are chasing the wrong bogey. Until we get a good process and great customer service from top to bottom, I don't know that any of this stuff makes a difference. So that's kind of, that's a lot of money to be spent before we have great customer service. That's the concern. I'd rather see half of this money go towards great customer service and take care of the capital before we start spending all this fancy money on consultants and this and that, and they're going to tell us who our industries are and everything else. The industry cluster is not that hard. I don't know that we need $1.7 million for somebody to tell us who our industry should be. I think we need to work on customer service.
Thank you, Mr. Hibbert. I would note that part of this budget that's not shown here is for training and customer service related activities. Being the former development services director, I fully agree with you that making sure we are business friendly, that any business can walk in this door and have someone to help usher them through the government process is key. So I didn't touch on it as much here as I maybe should have, but a big focus of the ED unit in particular will be to be that sort of permit expediter role. So to be the person that kind of that a new business owner can hone in on, form a relationship with, and then they can connect them through the process and help them get through the planning process, the building permit process, the streets improvement process. So your point is well taken. Thank you.
If I may as well, just add a couple of points to that, because we're in agreement, absolutely, that the process is critical and that we have to do well at that for any of the rest of those investments to be successful. In addition to the development navigators is kind of what we're calling those individuals. So that's part of the position ad is to have ombudsmans or navigators to help folks through the development process. What I would reflect about that $1.7 million, there's a question about that and based on the comment as well. What that represents is a placeholder so that, because we're not paying for new opinions with those dollars. We've already paid our Nadelson-Dale group to develop a strategy for us, and Brookings has developed their strategy. So what that money is for is when we get that full list of recommendations, it's funds to implement those recommendations. And if they perhaps made a recommendation to make an update or enhancement to our development process, we have those funds ready to go to say, okay, that's going to cost us $100K to do that recommendation. We have those monies available to do that. Or if they recommend something else that will help one of our target cluster industries to get a site development ready, we have those dollars to implement those recommendations that are coming out of that study. That's what that funding is about.
Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Hibbert. Is it your understanding or that we have a problem with customer service in the planning department in Bakersfield? Or economic
I am a
development?
big proponent of the biggest room theory. The biggest room in the world is the room for improvement, and we have lots of room. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I've heard, by the way, from builders who interact with both the county and the city that they would much rather do business with the city than the county of Kern. So that's why I asked the question. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question as well. Very nice presentation, very thorough. My question is in regards to opportunities for more funding that may be coming, say, from the federal government. Say, for example, I know we mentioned SB2. How would funding that may come from the government offset some of the funding that we're requesting today?
Thank you, Member Prince. That's a great question. It's all about leveraging. So I'll use the affordable housing scenario as an example. When this committee recommended that we allocate $5 million a year for affordable housing, the first thing that we did was look for other opportunities to supplement that funding with state money or federal money. So we ran a parallel process when we put out our notice of opportunity, essentially our NOFA, for the PSVS money, and ran that parallel with the federal process. And we gave preference to folks that should demonstrate that they were using both, that it wasn't just local dollars being requested, that they're leveraging that federal ask and that federal opportunity. And with SB2, the new state source for the permanent local housing allocation, the city expects to receive about $1.7 million a year from the state. And that's based on a real estate tax that's collected at the state level. So we will put together that affordable housing strategy that again sets up a ranking criteria or some sort of system where we can make sure that we're leveraging both funds. And at some point, if we created an affordable housing trust fund or continue to grow those other sources, we may be able to shift PSVS monies to something else, and that would be the goal.
Now, I'm assuming there's a difference between shifting and returning, correct?
Well, once they're spent, they're spent. So yes.
Thank you.
Good morning. Just two quick questions. What is the difference between line item number 2 redevelopment, urban revitalization in line item number 9 in community revitalization?
So that's, yeah, great question. I'll speak to the first one, and then I'll let Mr. Klug answer the second. Urban revitalization is a program that we started last year, and that basically sets aside PSVS money for taking an existing property, whether it be a blighted property, an underutilized property, or a vacant property, and facilitating redevelopment of that specific parcel. We're still in the process of defining the terms of what that means, and we'll bring a program forward with specific criteria. There is one approach where the city could just buy the property, clear the property like we did in the RDA days, but a lot has changed since RDA law went away. There's new disposition requirements, et cetera. So we're also looking at opportunities to use that money as gap financing to help support actual projects and redevelopment of vacant buildings such as those downtown and things along those lines. And then Mr. Klug, did you want to speak to the other item?
Yeah, happy to. And just really quickly on that former item on the redevelopment, it's largely about taking specific properties, that are blighted and or brownfields, and and getting them, back into productive use. The community revitalization program. Let me speak a little bit more to that. We have a unique opportunity with these funds to be strategic, and we wanted to create a program where we put public infrastructure in our urban neighborhoods that have not seen the same level of perhaps capital investment, but this can help to create different scenarios to then stimulate further capital investment in some of those disadvantaged neighborhoods. But as opposed to purchasing properties, we're talking about putting in infrastructure. That's streets, sidewalks, lighting, and other infrastructure that may help revitalize and incentivize further redevelopment. What's interesting about that is we said, well, let's take a look at other cities that have, with all these new ideas that are coming forward with PSVS, let's go and get the best ideas that are out there. And surprisingly, there are not there's hardly any other cities that are doing it quite this way. Most cities are leveraging state funds, federal grants, redevelopment grants, or foundation funding. And we're doing the same. We actually have 2 or 3 different state and federal grants right now on the east side under redevelopment efforts. But we didn't find that other cities had sort of designed a program. And so I think there's a couple of telling points in that. One, most folks don't have general fund revenues to put towards that, and we're fortunate we have an opportunity to move revitalization faster through these strategic investments from our resources. But it does also mean we have to design some program guidelines because we couldn't just pick from those best ideas. Now, we have taken some of those state and federal redevelopment or revitalization grants and looked at some of those criteria that they use. And it's largely based on both need and impact. What's the return on investment? That's the impact piece, and where there's some of the areas that have the greatest need. So we put this in the budget because we want to move forward with that program and have funds available to pick projects to do in this next year. But we actually have some work to do to refine some of those program criteria of how do we determine the areas of greatest need, and then how do we pick those projects that we think are going to have the biggest impact. I don't want to over-compare it to the topic of TCC, which some of you have, I'm sure, heard about, but it's those same types of projects that we could look at lists that have been created of proposed projects that meet some of those criteria, and then determine which of those projects we can fund within that $3 million allocation to make a big impact in those neighborhoods that need to see that revitalization.
And I might just add to that, Mr. Keller, I really see it as the city taking control of its own destiny. I mean, we can say that there's underutilized parcels in certain areas of the city and kind of wrap our arms around those, but until we put real money to that and make it shovel ready, put in the infrastructure, put in the sewer, put in the streets, bring the fiber out to that parcel, it's going to be really hard to capture the attention of national retailers, national developers, the Amazons, the Best Buys of the world, and people that we want to invest in our city. So this is a step in that direction.
Thank you.
I just had,
Mrs. Kitchen, did I understand that you said that with regard to urban revitalization, that we're still trying to figure out how to do that? Is that correct? And so, has there been any money actually dispersed to that project?
Great question. No, not yet.
Okay.
We do have the funds set aside. We have 2.4 million from the last 2 years that are in this fund. And as I mentioned before, kind of getting the staffing together to actually develop the guidelines and the criteria. I know that that's a sort of bureaucratic process, but it's an important one. We need to make sure that we're investing those funds wisely. And so again, we're sort of evaluating, does it make sense for the city to use that money to go buy property and hold it? Or does it make more sense for us to give it to a developer and allow them to do it best? So we're actually finalizing some program recommendations for that now that we plan to bring before the council.
Have we looked at incentivizing developers and
We have,
incentivizing
exactly, and
business
that's
owners?
kind of the second option, exactly, offering basically the gap financing to help them close the deal.
Okay, and one other question, and that is, if it takes us another year to figure out what plan might work the best, I'm assuming that those funds are still sitting there and those funds can be dispersed a year from now when we finally have a plan, am I correct?
That's correct. They are in account for that use, but I can tell you it's not going to take a year. One of my goals, even as an interim director, is to get it done in the next few months.
Thank you.
I just had a question about B3K. How long has that been in existence?
So B3K as and just for the viewing public, perhaps it's a regional economic prosperity initiative. It's been a process of doing both stakeholder engagement and market analysis for about this last 9 to 12 months. The market analysis has been complete for about the last month, and small working groups have been created to move forward with more specific recommendations following on the market assessment. But I would suggest the market assessment is pretty live. It just hit, and so lots of folks are reacting to that and making strategies forward on what the market data says.
And is there other community partners, or is it funded solely through the city of Bakersfield?
There are many other community partners. Actually, the Chamber of Commerce and the Community Foundation did a lot of work to go out and put together partnerships. That there was county funding, there's private funding, and foundation funding that were part of that overall project.
And last question, the Brookings Institute, do you have like another region or city that they've already been successful with?
That's a great question. Yes, there are some good examples. So Kansas is an area that has seen Brookings come in and take a very holistic look, and that they've actually been able to build a stakeholder environment that has everyone at the table. Another example that's not quite as comparable to us, at least in size, but in similar approach, Syracuse, New York region as a broader region, that area has also worked with Brookings. And there are some others, but those are two that we've looked pretty closely at and actually received feedback from and the stakeholders that were running those programs to the B3K group to learn from their successes and challenges.
Cool. Any other questions on this side? No? Good. Thank you, Ms. Kitchen. Should we keep going? Yes? Let's do it.
Yes, let's. So our Recreation and Parks Department presentation is next. Mr. Budak.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Dara Budak. I'm the Assistant Director of the Recreation and Parks Department, and I'm going to go take you through a presentation on some of our PSVS stuff. And one thing I would like to point out on page 1 here of this is you'll see our mission statement that we put together over 15 years ago. It says the Department of Recreation Parks enhances quality of life through programs, parks, and partnerships. So we've been in the quality of life business for a long time, and you're going to see how a lot of that plays right into what we're doing here. So you're going to see this map several different times throughout my presentation here. What this first one is it's the 61 parks that we currently have within our system, spread out all across the city of Bakersfield, and then Another note is to remember is the hundreds, literally hundreds of miles of streetscapes that we maintain with this department and some of the impacts that the PSVS has had on that. So you can see out of the community priorities here, we touch on 3 different ones: the keeping public areas safe, enhancing amenities, the quality of life, as I just mentioned, and then improved park maintenance. And I would say this last year has brought that to the attention, or brought more focus on that than any time in my career. I've been in Parks and Recreation for 25 plus years, and with the pandemic of the last year, we've had more visitors, we've had more people in our parks, more eyes on our system, and it's brought a lot of attention to our parks. We welcome it all. It's pointed out some things that we definitely need to take care of, but it goes to this thing we've been saying for a long time, you know, and you'll see it in the bottom corner there. Parks do make life better, and people have been out there, they've been using them, and this last year has really put a lot of attention on it. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about our Parks Rapid Response Team. Just for clarification, Code Enforcement has a Rapid Response Team, and then we have a Rapid Response Team. And our Rapid Response Team will work in city parks, city public streetscapes and areas where Code Enforcement, they'll go on to commercial property, residential alleys, and those types of things. But if it's in a park and a streetscape, our Rapid Response Team will respond to them. And as you can see, without going into all the numbers, I would like to draw your attention to 2 numbers there. If you look on our city source service requests, in 19 and 20, we had 552. And then in 2021, we're already at 1,125 requests for service. That's a 96% increase, and we're only about 75% through the year. You know, that's a huge increase, and with additional staff we've been able to bring on, the last number I'd like to point out is our average days to complete a service request in 19 and 20 was 39.5 days. So it was taking us, you know, a good 5-6 weeks to get some of these things taken care of. With the staff and the focus that we've put on these, we've now got that number down to 4.8 days to complete a service request ticket. And again, that's only 75% through the year. I'll save us a lot of time here, but I did want to bring up, you know, a couple of before and after pictures here. As you can see, it's a wide variety of things that the Rapid Response Team and city staff will take care of. Everything from cleanups to passageways, vandalism, a very large tree that fell down and blocked the road that we were able to send our Rapid Response Team out on a weekend and was able to get that open very quickly. And then the bottom one, that was a bathroom that was vandalized, burned to the ground, and our Rapid Response Team is able to go in there, totally refurbish that, and should have that back open in the coming weeks. That was a Wayside Park. Again, just more pictures of some of the work that's been done, some of the cleanups and efforts and referrals, special projects that we get from all across the city. And I think the before and after tell a tale of the detail that goes into it. And then to me, that picture in the top left, that's illegal dumping at its finest. I mean, right in the middle of the road, they dumped their load, drove away, and we were able to go out there. And then we work closely with, you know, our water department and some of the sump cleanups in public areas like that. So, you guys are very familiar with this chart. You know, we've talked about it and you've seen it many, many times. These are the various projects that have been approved through PSVS over the last, I would say, 2 years. Some of them just recently in the mid-year, and the contingent projects that were released in February. We're in a process of trying to come up with some unique ways to move through all these. These are a lot of projects, you know, and staff is trying to catch up very quickly, but we're trying to come up with some unique ways to expedite the process of getting these projects not only out to bid, but then also constructed and get the improvements put into the ground. So, and this yeah.
Please?
Yes.
With regard to those park improvement projects, do the city city employees do those, or do you hire those out?
It varies, you know, on some of the smaller projects, our staff will go in there and do some of the improvements, you know, if we're doing let's say some sidewalk work, or we're doing a trash enclosure and stuff, we have city staff go in there and do that, but on the larger projects, we will put those out to bid and have the work done by an outside contractor.
Improvement, tennis courts, things of that nature?
Those all go out, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, and then the next slide, what I'm showing you here is these are the parks that have been directly impacted by the PSVS projects that we've already done. There's 16 parks on there, and one of the main elements that it's hard to depict on this map is one of the first projects that were ever approved was a drought replacement for trees and shrubs along our hundreds of miles of streetscapes. We put in approximately 3,500 trees and 40,000 plus plants went into the ground. And in light of the recent events with the drought and everything, yes, we changed our plant palette. We did not go with it in similar trees. We went drought tolerant. We changed some of our irrigation techniques and stuff. So not that we're completely ready for the drought that's being talked about now. We are in a better position than we were years ago. So now let's move on to our this year's proposed park projects. We have 9 projects here. In the interest of time, I won't go through them all, but I would like to point out number 1. That's a priority project for our department. It's a facilities and needs assessment of 2 of our centers, the MLK Center and the Silver Creek Community Centers. What we're looking to do there is go in there and do a full assessment of it from, you know, the bones, you know, the HVAC, you know, the entire project or facility, and then talk to the staff, and then also reach out to the community and say, what these facilities need to be. You know, some of these are, you know, decades old, and demographics have changed, and now's a time to really go in there and look at these facilities and say, okay, what can they do or provide for the community today, and what are their needs today? So that's one we're really excited about. And then number 9, I think that's that neighborhood reinvention. That's a potential to take 2 parks and really reinvent them, and, you know, take a look at, say, hey, what's there? Maybe that doesn't meet the needs. Maybe 20, 30 years ago when that park was built, that was a priority, but times have changed, demographics has changed. We can go in there and potentially, you know, redesign and rework a couple of these parks. So, and then on this map of those projects, of those 9 projects, not including the number 9, because we haven't determined those facilities, but we will be touching or impacting these 15 parks. And you brought up a point about playgrounds and, you know, rehabilitation of them. One thing I wanted to point out is we definitely want to improve. When we go in there and we do a playground replacement, we don't go back in and just put similar product. You can see in this before after, we really try to improve what's there. We bring in some new designs, some new elements. In this one, we covered it with shade. And then one thing that you will notice is that entire playground there, we had the poured-in-place surface installed. So that playground there went from meeting, the one on the left met the ADA requirements, to the one on the right exceeds it. It is now 100% ADA accessible. So, you know, those are kind of improvements. When we go in there, we want to make it better than it was. We're not just coming in and plugging another playground in and moving forward. So with that, you know, we have 5 playground projects that we would like to add on to the list and move forward. Here's another playground that was recently completed. Again, you can see the shade element is critical for us. We didn't used to have that, but now we're trying to increase the use throughout the year and, you know, into the summer months, and have a lot of kids out there. So
I have a question for you.
yes.
I know parks are typically places with grass, barbecue pits, playgrounds and things of that nature, but is Uplands of the Kern an actual park within the city of Bakersfield?
Yes, it's counted as one of our parks. Now, it has some unique elements. When it was designed and put in there, it was designed to have an educational component to it. And that's why you'll see the observation decks. There used to be signage on them about the flora, the fauna, and everything that was out there. And we used to have a spy scope on there so you could actually zoom in and see some of the things that are going on. Well, unfortunately, because of the location and stuff, a lot of that has been vandalized, destroyed and stuff, and I think that's what Mr. Lane was referring to earlier on in his public comments. But yes, it is considered one of our parks.
Do we have plans to rehabilitate that park? Because I agree with you about the current condition of it, and I don't know that putting it back exactly the way that it was is the answer, but are there some plans in the works to do something to rehabilitate that park or that section?
We have looked at some options over the years on what to do there, and sort of the stance right now is we want to address the problems out there now, but then we're going to work with, the state, because there was some state grant money was involved in there to bring it back to that level. But to say a full-blown plan's in place, no, not as of today. But we've talked about it and we're working towards that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and now going back to our rapid response team in the Parks Division, as you can, as stated earlier, we've seen a significant increase in the command or call for service with our rapid response team. Our ask is, for 4 positions and the equipment to accompany them. And we also support the rapid response team from code enforcement with some of our equipment that we have through our parks division that we're able to use across the 2 different divisions and support their efforts in some of the major cleanups. And then here's a summary of the Recreation and Parks ask. As stated earlier, you can see the playgrounds, the parks, and then, the only ongoing cost right now would be the new personnel, and then our total ask for phase 3. And then one thing I did want to point out here is, with these phase 3 requests, excluding personnel, of course, we will impact 26 different parks with this last phase of requests, with the playgrounds and the park projects. We will impact, like I said, 26 of our 61 parks with this various projects and playgrounds. So I think that's a significant amount that will have an improvement done to that park. And with that, I will take any additional questions.
Madam Chair. So quick question, nice presentation, thank you. So rapid response, we have Parks Rapid Response and then Code Enforcement Rapid Response?
Correct.
There's 2 different teams. And so is the Parks Rapid Response, or are you guys responsible for the entire riverbed? Kern River Parkway?
That's a joint challenge with Code Enforcement and our division. So anytime there's a riverbed cleanup, we bring in all hands on deck. So it'll be our teams in conjunction.
You call for help, you call for help sometimes from the other group, from the...
Oh, absolutely, yes, depending on them. And, we actually depend on code enforcement for a lot of the posting of the camps and stuff, even if they're in our parks and stuff, for the 72-hour notice. We need them to come in and actually do, that posting for us, depending on where it's at, how long it's been there, and some of the legal.
So the parkway is a huge, that's a huge expanse to take care of. I applaud you for doing that. Is this request get us to the point where we can maintain, where we're going to be able to keep the parkway cleaned up? Because it is really bad. I mean, we've seen pictures and testimony from public, and then I've been out there too, and it's, in places rather embarrassing. Does this request with the additional rapid response get us to a point where we can keep the parkway clean?
I would say it's a step to getting us that direction, and our rapid response team, even, because I have 2 teams and they run 410s, we couldn't maintain that, and I'll let Christian jump in here, but it's just one step or one process for keeping that clean. There's lots of other departments and initiatives that are going on.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there because I think that it's accurate that it is an all hands on deck. The Kern River Parkway is one of our biggest parks and also our heaviest used parks and a real gem in this community. And through the pandemic, as with the CDC guidelines, we've had some challenges with encampment enforcement, and as that's freeing up, our rapid response teams have spent a lot more time in that area. Our flood outreach team has spent significant time in that area throughout the pandemic, and as noted, earlier today, that we're having rapid response go in and do big cleanups in that area, but we've got some catch-up work to do. I think between the third rapid response team on the code enforcement side, expansion to this Parks Rapid Response Team, but we're also looking to hire additional Clean City team and potentially more than one, but at least one Clean City team that is going to be responsible for litter and debris right there along the parkway. So those are all efforts to get at this issue more in earnest in coming months. When I say possibly, more than one team, we're going to look at least the Clean City teams. We have 6 teams right now. We're hiring a 7th. And we're going to look at then, do we need, after about a month of experience, do we need an additional Clean City team? Do we need, additional rapid response to really get at the parkway in different ways? We're going to evaluate that. But we have, and you'll see coming up shortly in the budget, about $300,000 recommended for the Clean City initiative beyond what we allocated last year to help us have those funds to say, do we need an additional, Clean City team or other resources? So there are several different teams that are going to be responsible for that area. And what I would say about this is there's 3 different pieces. There's the capital infrastructure of the parkway, and there are the conditions of homelessness near the parkway, and then there's sort of just the conditions of the impacts sometimes of homelessness with the litter and debris that needs to get cleaned up. So the capital condition of the parkway is actually quite good. We get lots of state and federal grants, and the trail itself is in very good condition. The conditions around the trail are not in good condition right now. And so the cleanup and maintenance of those areas, I think that this will get us fairly close, and if we need a little bit more resources, we can judge that over time. But I think this gets us pretty close to being able to maintain on a regular basis cleanliness along the parkway. The underlying challenge of homelessness is one that is not a short-term solution. There are going to be some long-term solutions to get at the underlying factors that put people at vulnerability to become homeless, and then also getting the homeless into services. So I just want to be, as far as expectations, I want to be clear that we have many hot spots throughout several parts of town and the parkway that we're regularly trying to engage the homeless population and get them into services. But I see that as probably a long-term effort. Whereas cleanup and maintenance of the impacts, I think we can get much better at in a short run in this next fiscal year with these resources, yes.
Generally, I'd say that the Parkway is one of those unique projects, I think, that everyone in the community, or most people in the community, would really sees a benefit to the community. And it'd be great if we could tackle that project as a big project, looking at cleaning it up, making sure the infrastructure improvements are being made, maybe as far as even getting water back in the river so we turn our riverbed back into a river. All those things are great, would be a great project, I think, a game changer project for the community. And I'd love to see those, discussed as a whole rather than little bits and pieces here and there. But that's just a suggestion moving forward. But thank you.
I believe our chairperson mentioned even security along the parkway in a previous meeting, and I have brought that up to you as well. And so you mentioned, and I completely understand and acknowledge how code enforcement works, how the rapid response teams work. the Clean City Initiative, things of that nature. But do we have anything in this budget that are going to allow us to either hire police patrols on that bike path around the Kern River or hire private security?
Thank you, Committee Member Rowland, for that question, because I failed to include that piece, because that is a consideration that we are looking at. In discussion with with Chief Terry, we think that it's actually fairly reasonably done with private security. It doesn't necessarily require the same costs as having police on the trail, and that our private security have a direct access line to PD when necessary. And you saw in the last presentation about the downtown efforts, there were 4,000 contacts that the security was able to address without having to engage police. So there is $700,000 in the budget for this coming year to expand the same services that have been downtown, such as biohazard cleanup and security, outside of downtown to other parts of the city. And my thought would be that that would be an appropriate bucket to consider security for the Kern River Parkway Trail out of that funding source.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may ask, thank you for the presentation as well. My question directly goes to project P2C047. That's the assessment for MLK and Silver Creek. And you're requesting a $500,000 in regards to obtaining a consultant. And from a time standpoint, what are we looking at from a consultant aspect to an implementation aspect? Because I know sometimes these things take a long time, and the last time I visited any of these parks, they both were in dire need of equipment upgrades as well as facility upgrades. And I don't think it takes a consultant to take a look at the parks and know where there's a lot of dirt that should be grass. And so would these parks have to wait until this consultant is completed until these type of things are actually implemented or improved at these facilities?
That's a great question. Thank you. Let me clarify a little bit. This assessment is for the facility only. The park already has some projects moving forward, such as the playgrounds and some other things that we will be doing very quickly. And we actually talked to some professional about moving the playground to make it a little more visible and stuff. So to address some of those concerns that we're already hearing from the community. So on the park side and the park maintenance, I think we're going to move very quickly on addressing some of those. There are some discussions. I know the corner property there with the county and stuff, that there's some ongoing discussions with what to do there that sort of draw down, the overall look of the park itself. But the maintenance side, we should be able to move very quickly and on some of those improvements there. Now, the facility, in talking to a couple of the contractors in researching this, it can take, in normal times, it can take 6 to 9 months to do one of these assessments. Now during the pandemic and some of the restrictions, depending on public comment and input, it could extend it. So it could be 6 months to a year before we get a total assessment done on the project.
Okay. So although we don't see any specific requests in this budget for MLK Park about improvements, you're indicating that those improvements are on the way, are ongoing currently?
Yes. Let me just double check. At our mid-year, we did have the MLK playground was approved. So that one's moving forward and right now through the process of being designed and then ultimately bid. So you should see that under construction in, I would say, the next 4 to 6 months.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question in regards to, years ago, I know that the city decided to close a few of the pools on the east side of town and some of the parks due to the fact that the cost of maintenance or the remodeling or whatever it took to maintain those pools. Is the city looking at the possibility of either opening up these pools again or constructing new pools in regards to replacing any of those pools that were taken away from the youth in those parts of town?
Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you. We have in the past, and I'll speak for the department over the last, 15 years, we did look at opportunities to do some of that, but some of the challenges moving forward and the overall maintenance and then use of the old, what we understand as rectangular pools, they're just not as attractive as they used to be. Now we try to build something, or we would like to build something similar to or McMurtry that has those play elements, like on our slide here, that would attract and have a bigger, greater use and instead of just a rectangular pool. So we're looking at doing some of those. I know it's way out there, but that is one of the suggested elements within the sports village, is to put in a very large community center. We were working with Kern High School District on doing a possible joint, because they use a lot of our pools for all their swim programs. But they moved forward on their project down there in the southwest. So as opportunity comes up, we'll look to build some of those facilities.
And if I could weigh in on that as well, just really quickly, we have had conversations about what are the right number of community centers or the right number of community pools for a city or community of this size. And typically you would probably see more community centers and more pools. But when you start to think about the costs for not only the capital costs, but also the staffing costs to staff those, it is really significant. It would be sort of another, fourth or 1/3 of the cost of a PSVS today to do a number of pools and community centers. And so as we've thought about master planning for parks and recreation, I think we need to come back to that topic. But it's one that is such of the magnitude of that consideration is so big that it's even challenging to think about where that fits within existing resources. And so we're saying, let's get at some of these parks issues that we know we can take on as these one-time projects, but we're going to have to come back, I think, to that master planning concept for parks and recreation and what are the types of facilities that we want to provide for the community, but those come with really big ongoing price tags.
How did you prioritize your list? What was your methodology to get the items 1 through 9 and then also the parks that are going to be revitalized? Just curious what you used.
They're not prioritized at 1 through 9. That's not a priority. That's just the order we put them in. I said the number 1 is a particularly important to us because of some of the long-term benefits. So the others, they're not prioritized in any way.
I may even, in the scope of our city, there's lots of parks and lots of needs. You were able to synthesize that down to 9. How'd you get to these being 9? Not that these 9 may not be in the right order, but how did these 9 surface over all the other needs? And then as you look at the proposed rehabilitation, how did you decide on the 5 parks there versus all the parks in the system? Was there?
Well, we put together a little over a year ago a deferred maintenance that was presented to the council, I believe it was last July. And several of these projects were on there, and these are some things that have been needed and wanted for several years. And so we, as their age or their usefulness, as deemed out, playground, for instance, we go by when it was installed. We try to replace the oldest ones, and then we slowly go down the list and, okay, this is our oldest playground. But sometimes we have to adjust that to accommodate for vandalism, special requests, those types of things. So we adjust it. It's not simply on the age of the equipment for the playgrounds in particular, but the necessity or the needs for something to be changed in there. We had one playground that was moved up the list because of the need for, there was the damage to the surfacing, but then also the need for additional ADA playground in that area. As directed by the city council member, we wanted to improve our ADA. So that was one area where we said, hey, if we go and do this playground now, we can have a direct, immediate impact over in this area where we've done it over here, and trying to spread some of that around. So, there's several different things other than age that go into it on the playgrounds. And then with the projects, like I said, they're deferred maintenance on projects that we've been asked for in several years throughout our budget request, and they've just not made it to the list yet.
I have one more
How-
question.
Oh,
Sorry.
Just
Sorry,
a quick
Connie.
question,
Go
no
ahead.
problem. This fiscal year 2021, how are we looking with our measure and funds? Are we going to have any excess funds that we could allocate maybe to this department?
We are targeting right now that there will be year-end fund balance. The numbers are, of course, undetermined at this point, but our estimates are that there could be in the range of $9 to $11 million in year-end fund balance that will be available to put towards projects like this or other mid-year type of projects.
Okay, thank you.
How do you feel the department's doing now on maintaining existing infrastructure? Is it efficient? Are they doing a good job? Part of my assessment is that sometimes replacement is accelerated because lack of maintenance. Meaning, things get beat up way sooner than they should because we're not watching the store. And so how are we doing versus other communities as far as of similar size, as far as the amount of work that your teams are doing on a maintenance standpoint? Do you have the lead personnel going around and checking those, seeing how they're doing on the maintenance side? That was originally one of the big concerns, was the lack of maintenance, and nobody was watching the store. Now we're talking about spending a whole lot of new money. How are we doing on the first task, which was, are we actually taking care of the investment we've already made? And is there low-hanging fruit by just improving the maintenance on those versus spending new money on new facilities?
well, there's a couple of things with that question. First, I would say our staff do a good job, and we're similar to what you've heard several times up here. We're very lean when it comes to the number of people we have. When you compare our national averages, we're averaging about 14 to 15 acres per full-time employee that they have to maintain. And the national average, well, this was pre-COVID, was around 9 or 10 acres. So our guys have a lot, our guys and gals out there have a lot to maintain. And unfortunately, when times were tough in the past, our department was always hit pretty hard. We're the first ones to lose positions. We get positions frozen and stuff. And so I would say the people that are out there that are doing the work are doing a good job. Could we use more? Absolutely. Can we do a better job? Absolutely. And that's something I think we're getting better at with some of the things that are going on with PSVS and the Rapid Response Team. They are now taking care of these big vandalism, these repairs, and these other things that would normally pull our maintenance crews off of, and now they're over here having to deal with this. And so, as you say, nobody's watching the store over here, and these things are going by the wayside. With the Rapid Response Team now dealing with a lot of those things, these guys are able to stay on task and do the day-to-day maintenance. So I would say, yes, we're doing a better job, and we're getting better at it. We've increased our number of areas. Through the general fund, we were able to get another supervisor and stuff in years past. So we decreased the size of the area that each supervisor is responsible for. So you have a little more, overwatch or, that day-to-day inspection that you're looking for. So we are addressing some of those, but we can do better. But I can tell you, in my opinion, our parks stack up just about against any of them. There's some that definitely need some attention, but overall, I would say our parks are something that this community should be proud of. And we heard that overwhelmingly over the last year from the people that are out there just walking for something to do, or, you can't go anyplace else, so everybody's at the park, and we've heard a lot of positive results. And I can tell you, I was listening to Mr. Boyle's presentation earlier. We didn't get 4 hours off. We never took any time off. Our staff was deemed essential from day one, and if anything, our work increased tenfold because of the sheer number of people that were in the parks using them on a daily basis. So,
I completely concur and agree with all of that, and I concur with your statement that probably back when things got tough financially for the city, yours was one of the first departments to receive cuts or hiring freezes, and I understand. Now we've been given this $70 million gift of money, and that's why I think a lot of people on this committee would love to see a significant portion of that money put toward parks and changing people's lives, and with particular attention to MLK Park in the southeast part of town, because people in economically disadvantaged areas don't have the luxury of personal swimming pools at home. It gets hot here in the summertime, if anybody's noticed. And so I realize that completely what you're saying with regard to water parks and the staffing level that would require, the maintenance that would require, but at the same time, I think this $70 million gift ought to be used to change people's lives in those areas of town, and we ought to be thinking outside the box. It ought to not be enough to plant grass and put a barbecue pit and a picnic table out there. Let's put some parks out there that people are rate a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10. Thank you.
And if I may really quickly, I think, you know, the feedback from this committee is important to us. And so when the committee said last time we were at mid-year, deferred maintenance is good, but it feels insufficient. Why don't we do more? We put that $1 million in based on that feedback so we could do some reimagining of at least 2 parks in this cycle, and we'll see about the next cycle even more.
Real quick, follow-up question. I was just going to ask about that reimagining. I think that's really a good project. Do you know which 2 parks yet, or?
no, they have not been determined yet.
Okay. And I think asking, you know, having the community participate is really good, and reimagining what the parks are about and what they want to see in their neighborhood is really good. But I think we need to be prepared because they might come back and say they want swimming pools and some community centers and some recreation programs for the youth in that park. So I think we need to be prepared to see that and be prepared to act on it.
Well, if I could just add, you know, we are in a process right now of getting ready to start our 62nd park. It'll be down in the southeast part of town off of Nell and Brahma, and that was a grant-funded project that our department worked very hard to get this grant. And we worked very closely with the community down there as part of developing that park, because with the grant and stuff, that, you know, that was part of the criteria. And so we learned a lot about, you know, what that particular area, but things that, you know, like you say, the barbecue pits and the grass are one thing, but they want to see something different. They want to see some interactive amenities and some passive type areas for people to just go out and enjoy the park. So
I had a couple questions still, while you're up here, and a couple comments as well. So for these playground rehabilitation projects that you have these 5 parks, is it safe to assume that the parks 1 through 9, they didn't need the rehabilitation, you know, the shading over the like jungle gym structures, or is it the same thing?
it's the same.
It's the same thing.
On a playground rehabs, they're going to be very similar in design with the shade and the.
But you have
the
like
surface.
the list of 9, and then you have a list over here.
The 9 aren't particularly just playgrounds. There's other elements within those 9. You know, for instance, you'll see number 3, for instance, is a McMurtry concrete pool and deck replacement. So this first 9 are not just playgrounds. There's other projects within parks that are being done, fitness equipment, trash enclosures, some improvements to San Miguel Park.
Got it.
So we have a list of 5 playgrounds, and then we have the list of 9 that are park projects.
Okay, that makes more sense. And then a question for the different departments. As you said, Mr. Boyle had also asked for this light equipment operator and a couple of the service maintenance workers. Do those ever overlap departments, or are yours exclusively Parks and Rec, his are exclusive? So you can never be like, hey, we have kind of a larger job, can I borrow your guys? It's never...
Well, we partner on projects. We definitely do. We'll bring our staff and our equipment to go over there and help with cleanups, you know, if they have a very large one, and vice versa. If we have something in the park, they will come over. But they will stay in the respective division or department as far as normal day-to-day operations.
And lastly, I just wanted to comment, mid-March, I think you're the guy to let know, and I say this with just my good citizen hat, not my Measure of N hat, but it was a Saturday afternoon out towards I was on the bike path on my bike, mid-afternoon on a Saturday, and one of the City of Bakersfield trucks was spraying on one side, right? And so there was kind of a backup as walkers and joggers and bikers were coming both ways trying to go around him. And I was so curious as to what he was spraying midday on a Saturday. And so my mind automatically went, is this guy making overtime? And why is he spraying in the middle of the day? And so I said, who could I talk to about that?
Well,
here I am.
I'll be happy to answer that question. I don't know the exact Saturday, but most likely it was not on overtime. It would have been work that was...
I'm saying that part just kidding.
Okay.
That more just as a comment. One, I actually rode my bike up to the window and asked him to roll it down. I said, what are you spraying? And he said it was weed killer. So I thought maybe that's not the best time to spray weed killer, right? As it's like one of the most popular times. So just noting that.
Okay.
So that I've done my public service, with my mom hat on.
Okay.
That at least with farming, right? We try to spray in the middle of the night with stuff like that. So anyway, if there's no other questions, we can continue on the agenda. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, I think we can get through our last two sections quite quickly. They're
Do it.
very, very short, and so we'll move right into human resources. This is a very brief request, and it relates directly to our police recruitment efforts, and then we'll do some citywide and wrap-up efforts.
All right, good afternoon, committee. Christy Tenter, Human Resources Director. I am very cognizant of time, and I've been challenged to consolidate while still not losing key content. So as HR always loves a good, measurable goal and is ready to adapt and be flexible, let's dive in. Part of the content that I will remove this afternoon is some of the great work being performed by our staff. We want to share a brief overview of the programs and the city services that HR does provide for all city employees, all 1,790 approved positions. And while I won't walk through each one of these, some speak for themselves, and in the sake of time, I will just point out recruitment and retention. HR really is that key to ignite the engine of what we're doing with PSVS. So all of the presentations today have talked about staffing or intended services or what we can do better. If we do not have the staffing and the key personnel in place to deliver those services, we don't move forward. And so again, we really ignite that process, and we've been very busy in doing that. So let's go ahead and look at what have been some of the actions and results from a human resources perspective since PSVS inception July of 2019. So specifically for human resources, we have had staff additions, 3 particularly, HR clerk, HR analyst, and an HR supervisor. We've also focused on technology. So when you look at the demographic of the candidates that we're sourcing at this time, technology is key. So we've had a great enhancement with candidate text messaging. So you would be surprised at how nice and the results that we are getting by sending those reminders to your 800 plus police recruit applicants saying, don't forget to come to your exam tomorrow, or please confirm your exam tomorrow. So again, anything we can do, we want to be that concierge of the recruitment side of the house, and so reminders and service updates are critical. So Candidate text messaging, very important. We've also instituted tablets so we can be remote with, especially with COVID, being able to be flexible and not maybe having someone in your office, but still share resources, point them in the right direction. As we return to recruitment fairs and go out on the road at times for different recruitment initiatives, it's going to be key to be able to show someone, visit our website here, please go and seek out your applications, etc. Citywide, specifically with PSVS, we've been able to fill 194 positions. So we have 22 vacant positions that are allocated to PSVS, all in some type of recruitment scenario at this time. In addition to that, the hiring and pre-employment processes that go along with those. So we have different regulatory and best practices, whether it's a written exam, a background check for a new hire, medical screening, drug screening, et cetera, the cost of hiring those individuals into those positions. We've also expanded and been able to have a more diverse portfolio for recruitment advertising and social media. Lots of Facebook Lives. If you don't have it, it's really great to see. Also on Instagram, we're doing orientations of, do you know what the job is? We have a lot of our police, civilian, and sworn positions where we're talking to them about how do you prepare, how do you get ready, what can you do? So really great features. Briefly, if we're not out in the market advertising, we're losing that potential candidate. So just this month, went on to governmentjobs.com, over 300 sworn officer positions listed between city, counties, school districts. If we're not on there, we've lost someone to one of those other postings. So we're able to advertise continuously and in the right markets for our, to drive our diversity initiatives and filling our positions. Specifically looking at sworn, what we're doing in safety, both police and fire, PSVS. We're very excited. We're in the latter stages of development for a dedicated www.joinbpd.us. Again, a critical presence in the on our website. We don't have a dedicated resource page. We have a link, you know, what's your careers, where can you go? But we need a full service platform. Again, that concierge, what are we paying? What's our benefits? Who do you talk to? What do you do? Great opportunities to connect with our candidates. We've completed 3 BPD police academies. We have 1 in progress. We have added 43 positions to our sworn complement. We have another 6 starting on May 3rd. We have another 8 academy graduates that are in the pool. So again, that number continues to move towards our hiring goals. We've introduced a hiring incentive. Many agencies are offering a hiring incentive to sworn personnel. Kern County Sheriff's offers upwards of $25,000 hiring incentive for new deputies. City of Shafter recently posted a $5,000 incentive. City Council authorized our $3,000 incentive, and we just added laterals at $4,500. Again, staying competitive in that benefit pool of what other agencies are offering. We've added some new testing. We want to have the right candidates, not just the numbers apply, but who can perform the work and focusing on retention. So some new dispatcher testing, critical. And we have an employee referral program. So very important, all patrol, I know this is small, I can hand them out if you need them. All patrol are asked to carry a nice little QR code. You're talking to someone at that fast food restaurant, grocery, you think this could be an ex-police officer for BPD. Give them the card, link them to the website, share the values, get the phone number and the email, make sure we're able to provide resources to them. So again, we want our employees to have a referral if they're bringing in candidates that are able to meet the needs of our agency. We also are looking at sponsoring trainees fully for academy equipment. When you look at the demographics of our police trainees, typically in early 20s, 21 or older, some just finishing college, some still in those part-time jobs. Many of those are asked to put up upwards of $700 for different equipment to be in the academy. We want to support that and help them not be at a loss when they start that program or not worry about funds for critical training equipment. That's police. That's kept us busy enough, but fire also, we've completed 1 academy to date. Now, as we look at phase 3 and what HR needs to continue to do to support council goal number 1, we focus our 3 requests for PSVS phase 3 at our quality public safety services, particularly hiring those 100 officers and retaining those 100 officers. So we have 3 specific requests. Some of the factors that drive these requests are listed on the next slide. We are requesting 1 full-time HR Analyst 2 position. HR, just as of last year, reached 2008 staffing numbers. So we are currently a department of 13. When you take that into consideration of professional standards, typically there's a 1 to 100 ratio of HR to staff, so we're a little bit low. When you look at other public agencies, as you've heard from my counterparts, we're still a little bit low, but we're getting the work done. Police training, though, this position will be specifically focused at our safety recruitments. Hiring police officers is a very time-intensive and regulated process. So the state agency POST, Peace Officer Standards and Trainings, has a variety of regulatory standards that one must meet to be certified by POST and be hired as an officer. This takes a great deal of dedicated time and also knowledge in the industry. We also know that the trends are changing expeditiously in terms of how do you attract, how do you retain? We need a dedicated resource. If you look back years, 10 years ago, we did an academy maybe once every other year, skipped 2 years, and at that we maybe hired a pool of 7 to 10 officers. We know to meet our requirements and stay up to date with attrition, we need to have 2 academies a year. So again, asking HR, who's just now getting back to 2008 staffing, to now take on that task workload in partnership with BPD is quite a focused effort. And so we believe having a dedicated staff analyst that will run the recruitments, monitor, look at data, look at trends, look at innovations, it's key to be present and available for the candidates, the market, et cetera. Part of our request also comes with examinations. Again, like with POST and our police officers or our fires, there are regulated, you have to give a written exam. We have to purchase that written exam. We have to have a facility large enough to test up to 800 candidates, which is usually here. So examination costs. And last, we want to look at training, focus at retention and resiliency within our police force. It's changing the market, the demographics of police officers. Again, I really focus on it's great to hire 100, but if you lose them, what have we gained? So when you look at national surveys, they report that today, 25% of officers hired will resign within years 1 and 3. In addition to that, we've had a new Senate bill in 2020, Senate Bill 542. It created a presumption for post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. What that means is something that's more common to the profession will be more readily accepted as a workers' compensation claim. PTSD does not need to be a career ender. Historically, it has. Someone has PTSD, and they oftentimes are retired medically. We want to contain those numbers, have support, have a culture of wellness, and being able to provide resources so that those who encounter these traumatic incidents are able to rebound, remain in their career, and active within our police force. General population has about a 7%, military's 20%, PD or police and general law enforcement are upwards of 35%. We need to contain and understand those numbers. When you look at career statistics, there's a 36% higher suicide rate for police officers by industry, and they are the second rated, highest rated profession based on suicide data overall. And then just what is our future culture of policing? We hear from citizens, we saw the challenges of 2020. What do we need to change? Any change requires strategy and sustainability. So if we don't have the right training and support mechanisms of resiliency and change management, just to use the buzzword, will our officers be successful in meeting the needs of a very quickly growing department and changes within the community and the profession? So again, with that, total request is listed, just under $200,000. You'll see the addition of the HR analyst is an ongoing cost, a full-time position. The pre-employment will be a 1 year to cover the associated costs of hiring for PSVS requested positions that you've heard through other presentations. And the last, to be determined. We'll see how our training initiative goes and what's successful and how it measures against our deliverables. And that is a $60,000 cost request at this time. Felt like I should get applause for that, but anyway. Questions, comments?
Go ahead.
First question, where have you been hiding?
I know.
How come this is the first time we've seen you? You
Should I
make more
defer?
sense than should be allowed on a
Should I
budget.
de-
So
should I
thank
defer
you.
to the city manager? Thank you.
So thank you for pointing out some of the hidden costs in policing and helping. I mean, as soon as you say it, it's obvious, but we have not talked about that yet.
Yes.
So thank you for that. Second question is, do you work with all the departments
Yes.
across the board? Do you also help them analyze, if they come to you with a need, whether it's better to hire in or to outsource? Because that may be a skill set that if somebody's really good at what they do, if you're really good at parks, you may not be the best to say, is this a good place to look at that hinge point? Is that something you also assist with? or-
Yes, and I am so glad that you've asked this question, because I'm usually tapping my foot in the back saying, oh, pick me, when this question of outsourcing comes in. We are a predominant unionized workforce. Over 85% of our employees are enrolled with the labor union. Labor unions specifically have parameters on its working conditions. And so oftentimes, if it's union work, there are restrictions. So I often partner with the departments. City manager's office will lay out the strategy and the goals. The departments often will look at, can we do this in-house or not? And we will assess that. There are several limitations in that process, because if it's union work, it needs to be assessed, can it be our union work? Specialty projects, Rec and Parks, just recently, we looked at one and said, yes, let's move forward. We met with the unions and advised them our intentions to move forward in terms of outsourcing that work. But there's a process to that we must get to, and agreement, and I do help facilitate that with the departments.
Great, thanks.
Excuse me, thank you. I have to agree with Barry. This seems like a civil service version of Shark Tank. But my question goes back to the ratio you described earlier in regards to 1 to 100. What is our ratio? I didn't see that.
Right, so, and that's just one of the more recent studies from the Society of Human Resources, SHRM, but we have 13 individuals in human resources right now, and we have 1,790 approved positions. So roughly you would say, if you were using those ratios, we'd be looking at moving towards 18. We have 13 at this time. And we are full service, we're generalists. So as you saw on that list, while we do have some outside vendors facilitating with some of the benefits and labor pieces, we still have a hand on the administration of all of it.
Thank you.
I have a question with regard to the 43 sworn positions that you say that we added. I know that we've had an extremely, a larger than usual attrition rate at the police department in the last couple of years. The chief told me that a few weeks ago. Have we actually added 43 people above the number of people that we've lost, or are we counting when 43 people are hired and 30 have just quit, that we have added 43 positions, when in reality that would be an addition of 13 positions?
Very good question. No, we'd be over our 100 if I was counting in that, using that math. 43 is the net. We were at, when we started, 387, and we've now advanced 43 positions. So that is 43, irregardless of those who have resigned or otherwise not successfully passed probation or whatever the means may be for separation. We have met 43 at this time.
Then you're probably counting those that are in the academy right now as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
If I may just add as well, I don't have the number in front of me right this minute, but I remember looking it up quite some time ago. We have hired more than 100 individuals. We've hired probably 130 police officers in the last 2 years. And so hiring has been very active. We just have, to your point, had a fair number of separations, just the typical life cycle of those in the police department. We were at a period where many were at the same retirement eligibility in the same years, and we've seen a bigger number there than typical, but we have been hiring very fast.
I would add to that, nationally, if you look at law enforcement, there's about a 12% turnover rate per year. Most agencies are reporting about a 12-year average tenure. We, historically, if you remove the academy out of that number, we're at about a 6.5 on average turnover rate. But with the academy, we're at about 12.5%. So right at that national average. We lose about 30%, and that's going to be one of our focused metrics moving forward is how do we engage, how do we attract, how do we get them over that hurdle of that initial academy, because we feel if we can, we keep them, so.
I have a quick question on the fire academy. Are we running our own fire academy like we are with the police academy?
We do, yes,
Okay.
yes. And we'll have one we have one slated under general fund for next year. Yes,
I had an idea for you on the incentives.
yes.
Guy Chaddick was a high-end furniture manufacturer that economic development successfully moved from Los Angeles to Bakersfield. As he made that move, he offered a housing incentive to employees where he paid their down payment, and if they stayed for X number of years, it was forgiven. I don't know if that has any merit in the context within what you're talking about, an incentive for the police officers, but maybe those lateral moves, that might be an incentive for somebody who's renting in Los Angeles to come up here and buy a home. So Guy Chaddick would be a good one to investigate how he did that and what were the pitfalls.
I love the
of him
referral
doing
on
it.
that,
And-
absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure that SHRM has data on that, because that was a very successful program.
Yes, and we do have a committee meeting between PD and HR, and that is one of the things we are looking at. We did lose the candidate. It's a tough housing market, so someone trying to relocate here and identify housing, if they have to do a down payment on an apartment, can they find an apartment? We are trying to look at ways to facilitate even just an entry into the community, but also housing bonuses will be part of that. That's been a request that's been made as well. Excellent.
I just wanted to note how incredibly helpful a lot of your statistics were. Often, as a committee member, we're asked right away, what happened to the 100 policemen that you guys were supposed? This makes so much more sense that you mentioned the number of academies that we're not having, the retention, a police officer will resign in 1 to 3 years. That's a great statistic to have in our back pocket when people are asking about the police force. And the 2008 historic staffing levels that you're at right now and the impact that that has. So that's just, it's very useful in conversations that I would have with, people who inquire about Measure N funds. You mentioned quickly that Shafter has the incentive of 5,000.
Correct.
How is their staffing? Do you know if that is actually a good incentive?
One of the things that we've looked at, again, I mentioned the county's upwards of 25,000 over like a 4-year integration. As we met as an internal team, we've seen some bonuses as much as 50 in the nation right now, 50,000. And so we're not seeing our employees leave to go to the county or to, well, some have maybe gone to Shafter. I'll look at AC Hill over there. But while we have seen a bit of that, we don't see a mass exodus. So we're hiring in such larger numbers right now. Going too high is obviously not economically feasible. But they hire, they add to academies. They don't run their own typically. They'll add 1 or 2 into ours or a neighboring agency, or they're doing an academy graduate lateral. So it's a little different in their dynamics. I just recently saw the 5,000, so I don't have any measurable data on that one to say, did it really bring anyone in or not?
Sure.
So back on the incentive,
Yes.
though, with economic incentives, they are rarely the reason a company will come to a community. It's about the culture, it's about the workforce, it's about logistics. The incentive, not really the issue. Usually, with employment, it's about the culture of the organization. So if the culture is great, and maybe that's what you're kind of saying, is that we have a good culture, that's why people aren't exiting, continuing to enhance that culture is probably equally as important. Is that accurate?
Yes, you're onto something
Spending
there.
money there versus on incentives, because somebody who's going to make the move for the incentive may not be the person we want anyway.
One of the main reasons we wanted to put the incentive in place is we heard from one of the groups of trainees at an orientation that they were connecting with the local credit union to get a loan to purchase uniforms.
And that makes sense.
No,
The
we
upfront
can't
cost.
we don't
The
want you to
upfront
have
cost.
that. So let's cover you and make that easier. Don't be in the hole to start a job with us where we want a career. You're exactly right on culture. A lot of it is opportunities. So we have a lot of opportunities with assignments, SWAT, Special Task Force, et cetera, that you don't get in a Shafter. You don't get being in the jails. And so we have that attraction capability. So again, we're trying to keep whole and be relevant in the market with the incentive, but we're not trying to, we have great numbers. We get 900 that apply. So we need to get them over the initial how do we keep them to stay, and so they don't feel like, do I buy the $100 flashlight right now or quit because I'm having a rough time? Flashlight's out of it. Let's talk to you now, person to person, about why you want a career with BPD. So culture, yes.
Curious about the little card that you distribute. How long have you been doing that, and what's the success rate?
Again, I'd have to give props. We've collaborated with Assistant Chief Hale on these, and gosh, 7 months? Oh, almost a year. What I love, and technology services will help in this, what I love is that the QR code gives us a report where we can identify who's scanning the card. Then we can target, do we need to do Orange County? I mean, this is so great from HR versus just the newspaper in the past, right? But you can then say, well, do I need to focus in Orange County because all my hits on the QR were down south? Right now, that's all we're using it for. We haven't tied it to anyone at this point who says, I applied because of the QR code. We're hoping that'll be a future aspect, and on the application, you'll be able to check, oh, I got a card. So no data to report, but we're seeing some good statistics on where are our applicants at.
And forgive my ignorance, to be a police officer, do you have to have a degree?
No, you do not.
So is there any type of recruitment going on at like the high school level or the junior college level?
We have resource officers and those from the department that do have some of those activities. That's not a centralized HR function at this time. We're just trying to fill the slot. So PD would have to discuss the outreach at that level. We do have college, whether it's posting materials, et cetera. We are going to the universities, but HR is not at the high school level at this time. And then, of course, the Explorer program, that brings in some of the younger youths, the academy, things of that nature.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have just a couple slides on the citywide strategic initiatives. These are citywide topics that don't fit automatically into one department. And so, but they're related to strategic priorities of the council and the 13 priorities of this measure. So our Clean City Initiative was one of those last year. We've seen tremendous results already from our Clean City teams. Public Works reported on that at our first meeting. The amount of debris and litter and bulky items that are being removed from our streets. We anticipate some need to continue to support that program and have some flexibility, as I mentioned, to add another team if we determine we need an 8th team, or if we determine we need some additional supplies to support cleanup events. This is what that funding would be for. I already mentioned earlier this private security and biohazard expansion. We want to be able to offer this in other targeted areas of the city, and this is where we would fund, bicycle patrol security along the parkway, as well as some other targeted hotspots that we're going to follow the data on where we've had challenges and issues related to homeless encampments.
In addition to, I thought we had $1 million we talked about for security in our last meeting. Is that true? Was it 100,000? I can't remember. There was for downtown expansion of the downtown security.
So at mid-year, we made an expansion to downtown security, and this is separate from that. This is additional dollars to go beyond downtown.
But you're lumping in security with biohazard cleanup for the $700,000, right? And I know what the biohazard cleanup program is. So any ideas on the
split?
Percentage of split up there?
We have not made that determination as of yet. Part of this was looking at how much funding we thought we could make available based on some of the other priorities. And so we created this bucket to do both of those things, but haven't determined a split.
Okay, thank you.
Then some additional dollars. Right now, through the pandemic, any individual who commits a misdemeanor, the jails are not taking any misdemeanants to be held. And we want to, and sometimes there are individuals who may be repeat offenders or causing significant quality of life issues that there's nowhere for them to go. And so this would be a partnership with the county to try and take a look at some of those priority issues that we want to address, even at that they may be lower level offenses. And then the second item there on internal audit, this year funded a risk assessment, and that risk assessment is actually, we had slated it for third or fourth quarter, and we're just about to embark on the actual assessment itself. But pending the results of that risk assessment, the way I described it last, a health checkup. It's like a physical for an organization, and there are firms that do this specifically for local government agencies to take a look at where are our risks and how is our performance across the board. And coming out of that risk assessment, I anticipate there will be some areas that they're going to recommend. You may have some risk there. Maybe your capital projects could be more efficient, or maybe your procurement processes have some opportunities to have more efficiencies, or maybe there's a need for greater internal controls. And so this would be a set aside to allow us to come back based on the results of that risk assessment and do 3 or 4, maybe even 5 projects that would take a hard look at some of the areas of the city that could use some improvements. This would be contracted out to audit firms that do performance audits and internal control audits. This last slide on overall initiatives, we had $100,000 in last year's budget for employee development. With those funds, we were able to work on a wellness program, and we've been envisioning a citywide leadership academy, or sort of, we call it, Bakersfield University, to do succession planning and leadership training within our organization. But this is actually a small dollar amount for the importance of developing, highly qualified professional staff. And as you noted, our human resources director is fantastic, and I'm glad that you noticed. And we have staff in our technology and finance and human resources that don't always come before this group, but that do really important work behind the scenes. And while we have to make sure we're efficient with every dollar and see where it makes sense to not necessarily spend those dollars on adding too many employee positions over time, it's really important to invest in the employees that we have, build skill sets, build leadership capacities, and build the culture that we want. And this is a fairly modest investment actually towards that, but allows us to continue to push on that issue of moving towards the right culture and skills that we want in an organization, and leverage the most expensive resource in any organization is personnel, and we want to maximize that investment. Lastly, on position requests. So we're requesting an assistant to the city manager and a budget director. And let me say a little bit more about those. As this committee has asked for data and outcomes and measures and reports, right now, because as we talked about earlier, our staffing ratios, we're a fairly lean organization. And so the budget is right today, our city budget is put together by our assistant city manager, Chris Hewitt, our finance director, assistant finance director, and 1 analyst in the city manager's office. An organization of our size typically would have a budget officer and 4 to 6 budget analysts. We're not recommending creating an entire budget office with 6 analysts, but having a budget director allows us to have somebody focused keenly and completely on that topic, whereas right now it's one of many duties from other generalists within the organization. And as not just the annual budget process moves forward, but any proposal that goes to the city council or that comes up through a department and reports on staff items going to the city council, I would like to have somebody taking a hard look at the numbers for every one of those reports. Right now, that is done by the department level staff, and they do well at that, but it's different than having a citywide lens and that perspective. And so a budget director will allow us to have that higher level of analysis and input into all the decisions citywide, as well as, again, not relying solely on a number of staff that have many other duties putting together the budget each year. Similarly, on performance and innovation, I would like to actually, over time, build out a performance and innovation team. We'll see what that looks like, and we're trying to take it in measured steps. The city of Long Beach has a performance and innovation team that's made up of about 4 individuals. And they take on a number of projects in any given year. But what this initial role would be focused on is driving the use of data and evidence-based practices and performance management citywide. Again, there are some departments that have, through industry standards, taken on different elements of performance management, but it varies between departments and divisions. And this would be someone whose responsibility is to see, are we being efficient as an organization? Can we improve our processes? Can we invest in innovations that will gain greater efficiencies? And so I think the return on investment for someone who's going to both drive culture in the organization and identify many projects and initiatives that get us better, smarter, faster, that's part of being an even better lean organization. If we're going to be lean, we need to be smart, and we need to be thinking about how can we do the work that we do better. So the role of the assistant to the city manager that would focus on performance and innovation is about that, and you can expect that a role like this would be responsible for making sure we have key performance indicators, not only for PSVS, but across all of the functions of the city, and producing those reports, and that would be a dedicated resource to do that. Let me pause really quickly if there's any questions on this last set of items, and then we want to show some summary slides. Okay. So we wanted to just put into context phase 3, and if you look at phase 3 there, there are about $7 million of new positions. That's largely, it's about 46% is at least of the personnel, and that pie chart isn't reflective of that, but I just wanted to point out, a huge percentage of that staffing is from police and code enforcement. The rest are fairly specific strategic positions, but then we do have those capital improvements that are significant in phase 3, $22 million. If you look at this slide, this is for all phases. We wanted to take a step back and say, what's the cumulative impact of where the monies are getting spent for all the areas of the full $77 million, because some of that is in some of the ongoing. You see it's about $35 million in salaries. The operating of 19 million includes some of the typical operating costs, but as well, many of those contracts for services that we've let, as well as things like the redevelopment dollars and the EOA dollars. We've been considering those ongoing operating costs, but again, those are flexible costs we can adjust over time. And I think this graph is really important because it tells you that policing, and if you include fire for public safety, is a vast majority of, or is the biggest chunk of the PSVS spending. If you look at economic and community development and development services together, that's where we're addressing homelessness and economic development, and that's the next biggest piece. Then when you look at public works, that's almost entirely projects. There are some staffing to support the public safety needs in our fleet, but most of those public works dollars are also projects, capital projects benefiting the community. And then the next chunk that you can see there is recreation and parks, and that is partly staffing for our rapid response teams, as well as significant park investments. The remaining slices of the pie are quite a bit smaller. And so hopefully this puts into perspective where we're putting the funding and where the prioritization has been for the measure across all 3 phases. With that, we would entertain now just showing you a summary slide from each of the departments from both the first meeting and the second meeting, and answer any last questions that the committee has related to these items, and would recommend that these could be taken up department by department for vote from the committee. If there's a desire to split those out, we can work through that. But we would look to let these summaries stand as recommendable items that the committee can take action on.
I appreciate that, organizing these into the slides at the end. I was like, how are we gonna get through this? I know it's late. It would be my recommendation that we do take this slide by side, that we do not break them up. And we do, as we've done in other meetings, to leave comments where people feel it's appropriate to leave comments, suggestions or recommendations for the city council to review. Is everyone in agreement with that? Maybe we can get through the voting and call it a day. Yeah, let's do it then.
I have one question with regard to the percentage of the PSVS 70 million, call it $78 million budget. From now going backwards to when we first started, what percentage of the PSVS budget is going to be next year paying for staffing positions total?
Second one, Chris.
Committee Member Rowland, if you look at this slide with the proposed positions that are included before you today, the total amount is about $35.3 million. I'm going off memory, but I want to say that's around 44% or so.
Okay. Thank you.
I also just wanted to note on your pie chart, being that we've just recently heard, the struggles with the Human Resources Department working at 2008 levels. It just seems like the 1% allocated to human resources is small. I'm just throwing one out there for her.
You're making an assumption that things were efficient in 2008.
Well, seems like
That may or may not be the case.
A lot of work to do. All right. Yes, go ahead, sorry.
This question, I guess it's partly for Chief Hale and partly for the city manager. Before we get into it, because it's going to be the first one we talk about, the Bakersfield Police Department, we're asking for an addition of 28 sworn positions and then 17 non-sworn. You've also mentioned that we are expecting a balance at your end for additional funds. So the reason for my question is we're asking for 28 sworn, but sorry, Ms. Tenter noted that we've had an addition of 43 officers to the police force. Yet in the last 2 fiscal years, we've approved 72 positions. So we've got 29 positions unfilled but funded, and we're asking for 28 more. So I guess the question as a taxpayer would be, why are we filling those or trying to fund them now when we could put them later into the expected balance and take some of the extra money that we're not going to be getting 28 officers and putting more code enforcement officers out or more planners for the economic development or any of the other positions that have been requested right now?
Thank you, Committee Member Louie. This is a great question. We've been asking ourselves the same question. There's a couple of different factors. One is that if we decided to forego funding into those areas, I think we would be careful to not fund other ongoing areas because of the cumulative effect, unless we were anticipating building out some of those ongoing areas later. And we're right now looking at it, and we think there's probably some strategic areas where we might need some more resources, but we're very much narrowing the right sizing of staffing, we think, and that's why this phase 3 is much smaller than phases 1 and 2, and I would say next year would be much smaller still again in the 4th year of the measure. Secondly, we actually need these authorized positions to be able to work through the academy process. And so even though we have 29 vacancies, our July academy could have as many as 40. We hope 50, although that would be probably a bit optimistic, but we're authorized to hold academies of up to 50. But if we had an academy of 40 in July and then another academy of 40 in January, that's sort of 80 total positions. And so we may actually start cutting into these 28 by next January, and that's part of this current fiscal year. And we also need those authorizations to have the authority to go forward and request those academies and do the recruitments that have a 6-month lead time leading into them. Without those authorized positions, we wouldn't be able to start planning in July for that January academy. So there is some of that, I guess, lag time on the timing and the accounting piece. What I would say, though, is as we have committed and we've expressed this to this committee, that if there are PSVS policing positions that remain vacant, as general fund positions become vacant and we sort of shift folks into those general fund positions and there's these PSVS vacancies, at the least it is accruing some of those vacancy savings that won't be allowed to go to any other purpose. So the vacancy savings has to be approved through city manager's office, city council to spend in some other form or fashion. So what that means is if we don't reach the full staffing for those 28, let's say by January, and we accrue some of those savings, that will come back to this committee as a year-end balance that we can then say, well, what important projects do we want to put those towards? So we could try and plan ahead and say we only anticipate maybe filling X number by X date and set those monies aside in advance, but it actually makes it really complicated for us to try and hire as many as we possibly can. But at the end of the day, those monies will come back to this group to say, what else can we do with them if they weren't spent on that staffing through the full 12 months?
Thank you.
Just have a quick question as well. It appears that almost 50% of the budget will be going towards salaries and benefits. And it wasn't a vision of mine that when it comes down to these taxpayers' dollars, that high percentage would be spent. Are we allowing ourselves to be able to look at years from now with other projects that will come before this committee, come before the city, that we will have enough allocation that will go towards those projects and not be subject to half of the taxpayers' dollars in this measure will go towards salaries and benefits? And projection-wise, are we making decisions today based on some good returns? And over the next 3 to 5 years, are we expecting these amounts to increase? Because I know that salaries will continue to go up and benefits will continue to increase as well. And so it just seemed a pretty high percentage based upon what is coming in compared to what is going to automatically each year be subject to a certain percentage.
Thank you, Committee Member Prince. And that is another very fair question. And it's one that's come up many times. And so we've taken a very hard look at it. First of all, the projections, we're actually fortunate that was funded through PSVS in this last year to have built a long-range financial planning tool that can help us forecast full costs over a 20-year period, not even just a 3 to 5 or a 10-year period, but for the next 20 years, how much does 100 new police officers cost us? We're actually in the final stages of refining that tool. Otherwise, we probably would have put some graphs in front of you showing some of those trend lines. But we are looking at those trend lines because not only in the categories that you mentioned, but also in pensions. And so what is the tail on pensions over time? And fortunately, with the measured pension reform in California, new employees have different tails than employees that have been with the city longer. And that, but that also needs to be accounted into those graphs. The good news is that the growth in the public safety vital services tax measure revenues is well outpaces the anticipated increase in ongoing costs to PSVS in this 20-year model. That much I can say. But I think more important to that is, yes, we have heard clearly, and we've shared the belief that we have to set aside a certain amount of funds that don't get committed to ongoing costs and make sure we can do projects. This year, we were able to do about $30 million worth of that type of work. Some of that ended up in specific projects, and some of it ended up into some of the operating amounts like the community revitalization and redevelopment dollars. But I think if we are able to maintain about that amount of $30 million plus a year, and that will probably grow over time as well. But if we have a baseline of at least $30 million a year to do capital projects, affordable housing, the special priorities of the city, I think that that's a pretty strong number. And I think that that's very attainable. We think with this staffing levels, we'll be able to have at least $30 million a year to get at the priorities of the city. Beyond, I would suggest that the staffing is also reflective of the priorities. The staff that we're adding is reflective of the things people want to see, but we'll still have that $30 million to do projects every year.
Any other questions or comments before we get going? I don't think we need to remind each other what we're here for. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll take it slide by slide, and we'll do a motion, a second, a roll call vote, one by one, and then have the opportunity to leave any comments or suggestions for the city council to review.
Sure everybody agrees. First.
Does, you could just, Barry mentioned to ask if anybody wants to do it a different way, start with a different.
Is everybody comfortable? We can do it slide by slide where you say, okay, we're going to first start with the Bakersfield Police Department. And were there any breakouts in that, or is that unit acceptable to everybody? And you can vote on that, and then you can go to the next one. And then I think there's one specifically Public Works that's going to need to be broken out.
Correct.
And if there's others that need to be broken out, maybe that is, voice that before we get started. But otherwise, they're going to go as bulk units, I think.
Well,
But you tell me.
I think even the Public Works one, we can vote on it, whether it falls within the guidelines and the criteria, and then we can.
That's
keep
a good point.
People can
That's a
just
good
leave their
point.
comments per bullet if they would like to. I mean, that's the way we've done it in the past. It isn't like they're,
No, that's a good point there.
Mitchell, anything? Jeremy?
No.
Any suggestions?
No, I think doing it slide by slide, let's just do it, yeah.
Let's just do it.
Roll.
All right.
Different for Public Works or no?
No, I mean, if there's elements of the Public Works slide that don't, in your assessment, don't fit, or you want to leave a comment, you vote appropriately for it and leave a comment.
We can separate them. So let's start with the first. We'll take it slide by slide. How about that? The first one is yeah, we could start with the Bakersfield Police Department. So we'll break up that slide and do it right. The
Yeah.
Bakersfield Police Department and the Fire Department.
Yeah, that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we will wait for a motion. Bakersfield Police Department at 10.55 million.
I make a motion that the Bakersfield Police Department allocation of 10.55 million be approved, and that it is consistent with the 13 measures as outlined in the Measure N guidelines.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
Who is that? Oh, Mr. Prince. So we'll do a vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Member Keller. Absent. Committee Member Holt.
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Yes.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland.
Yes.
Committee Member Louie.
Abstain.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Keller absent and Committee Member Louie abstaining.
So we'll leave this window if anybody would like to leave comments, for recommendations or suggestions.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes, I would just like to go on record that I do not agree with the overall summary of payroll and benefits exceeding 40% of the proposed budget for Measure N. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you. Okay, we'll go to the next bullet for the Bakersfield Fire Department at 420,000.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that the Bakersfield Fire Department budget proposal is consistent with the 13 goals outlined in the Measure N guidelines. I recommend approval.
I'll second.
Do a vote?
Chair Sanders.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbert.
Yes.
Committee Member Keller. Still absent. Committee Member Holt.
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Yes.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland.
Yes.
Committee Member Louie.
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Keller absent.
Great, thank you. On to the next, Recreation and Parks Department at 5.2 million.
Committee Member Holt will make the motion that the Recreation and Parks budget of 5.2 million is consistent with the spending priorities in the ballot and make such a recommendation to the City Council.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you both. We'll do a vote.
Chair Sanders.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbert.
Yes.
Committee Member Keller. Absent. Committee Member Holt.
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Yes.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland.
Yes.
Committee Member Louie.
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Keller absent.
Are there any questions or comments on this one?
I'd like to leave a comment. Just that the City Council would consider allocating whatever excess we have in fiscal year 21 to this department of maybe at least $5 million.
Thank you for that. I will also just comment, maybe you're already doing this, I'm not sure. But on these projects that, like the beautification, the shade over, are you by any chance putting like a label that said provided by Measure N funds so that the general community, you do that? Okay, I thought so. Perfect. Just thought that would be nice.
And really quickly, I'll ask Mr. Hewitt to say a little more about that because we feel like we could do a little bit better on that noticing of that. And so there's several measures in place.
Quickly for the committee, two items there. One, on the Clean Cities vehicles, if you've seen them around town, they've got big billboards on the side of them. You can't miss them. And part of that messaging is not only to how to access the service, but that they are provided by the Measure N funds. And then second, to Mr. Clegg's point, we are actually in the process of fabricating 3 different types of signs depending on the project. It'll be prominently located adjacent to the project, depending on the project limits or scope.
So we'll go to the next slide, next bullet, Public Works Department at 8.2. We'll wait for a motion.
Committee Member Holt will make the motion that the 8.2 millions in Public Works Department proposal is consistent with the spending priorities of the ballot measure and will make such a recommendation to the City Council.
Thank you.
I would like to make a comment. Actually, we don't have a second, do we?
We don't have a second.
Okay, I'll refrain.
Committee Member Louis, seconds.
Oh, we have a second. So do we open up for discussion? Can we, or do we wait till after the vote?
You can open up for some discussion if you want before you vote. It's fine.
We don't have a second.
We do have a second.
You have a second.
Okay.
Why don't we go ahead and do a vote and then we will leave comments or suggestions like we have.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
No.
Committee Member Keller is absent. Committee Member Holt,
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen,
No.
Committee Member Prince,
I abstain, possible conflict.
Committee Member Rowland,
No.
Committee Member Louis,
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
No.
Motion fails with Committee Member Hibbard, Perez Andreessen, Rowland, and Tobias voting no, Committee Member Prince abstaining, and Committee Member Keller absent.
Okay, we'll leave the window open for comments, suggestions.
I'll start. I think the main challenge that I had with these is that there's such an emphasis on the freeways and although I agree there is a nexus between the beautification and the entrance to our freeways and to our community through the freeways, I don't know that the general public at this time feels that is a priority. I think looking at the Kern River, specifically the uplands of the Kern and the bike trails and the parks and things that impact citizens that are here today, at least in the circles I am listening to, has risen beyond the economic development of beautification of freeways. And so that's the main reason. There's so much money in there for those things. I think those are better served at a later date. I agree there's a loose economic development nexus between the entrance of our community. I also think, though, the homeless problem and some of the other community well-being issues to date could be better served by reallocating those funds and waiting on the freeways for a later date.
I'll go next. I did support I voted no, but although I supported many of the aspects of the request, I agree the freeway, there was so much emphasis on the freeways. And to me, I think we're letting the state off the hook by just grabbing this and saying, we'll do it. They're atrocious. The freeways look horrible. I totally agree we need to figure it out, but the state likes to hammer our community on a lot of different things and it'd be nice if the state took care of their own properties. So that's why I voted no.
I would agree with both of my fellow council or committee people. I would like to see Chester Avenue improved. I would like to see the Mill Creek bollard replacements. I'd like to see the sidewalks improved. I'd like to see the crosswalks improved. Those are great projects. I cannot get behind nearly $6 million in funding for hardscaping and landscaping, and I agree with Mr. Hibbard. It just probably isn't a public priority right now. I do want to say, however, that I've driven into towns and I understand your goal where there's nice hardscaping and it's a beautiful entrance to the city. And I don't say that we shouldn't pursue something like that. We just don't believe that right now is necessarily the time to do that. I hope that you'd find some way to fund the street lights that we wanted from the very beginning when this committee was formed. But I think we have to set aside the freeway beautification for now. And again, one other suggestion is if this comes back up, whether to this committee or another, an explanation that might help is what part of that should be funded by Caltrans and what part of that is the obligation of the state government versus the city. It might help the committee to better understand why they should invest that money.
Thank you, Mr. Rowland.
And I'll just add that I do agree with some of the proposed projects under Public Works, but as my fellow committee members mentioned, the landscaping, I just can't, get behind that. And as a mother of a 3-year-old, I know how important it is to have access to, safe parks for your children. I live in the Southwest, so I'm lucky and I'm fortunate that I'm able to take her to safe parks, but I can't imagine the mothers that live by MLK, East Baker, so that don't have the same luxury. And it makes me really sad. So I'd rather some of these funds go to the parks.
Anyone else? I just wanted to comment that we do encourage the city council, as they look at these line items one by one, that even though they do fall within the criteria that the voters voted for, that they would come up with a prioritization of these projects. And when we go over it over and over, of the priority of what, voters actually voted for, was it public parks? Was it public safety? I just encourage the city council to find a way. I'd also encourage that group B3K to see, the value of enhancing these freeways in other cities. What has that done for the economic development, since they have experience in those things and we don't. So thank you. Anybody else? Great comments. Development Services Department at 1.3.
I will make a motion that the Development Services Department budget of 1.3 million be recommended to the City Council for approval, and that it is within the guidelines of the Measure N guidelines.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We'll do a vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
Yes.
Committee Member Keller is absent. Committee Member Holt,
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen,
Yes.
Committee Member Prince,
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland,
Yes.
Committee Member Louie,
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Keller absent.
Great. Does anybody have any comments you'd like to add? Great. We'll go to the next one. Economic and Community Development at 7 million. Is there a first?
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion in regards to the Economic and Community Development Department request of $7,015,447, that it does fit within the guidelines of Measure N.
Thanks.
Committee member Louis seconds.
Thank you. With that, we'll do a vote.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard,
No.
Committee Member Keller is absent. Committee Member Halt.
Abstain, possible conflict.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Abstain as well, possible conflict.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland.
Yes.
Committee Member Louie.
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Halt and Perez Andreessen abstaining. Committee Member Keller absent, and Committee Member Hibbard voting no.
Thank you. We'll leave this time for comments.
If I may add a comment in regards to this as well, and I will make this comment stand for any other summaries or requests to add more employees to the city's role, that my statement is that I don't think that the salaries and benefits should exceed more than 40% of the annual budget for our Measure N. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would just like to caution the city council on moving forward with economic development plans that are developed by planners. Because planners like to talk about things that are conceptual and not about the practical application of what does it take for money to invest in our community, whether it's money that already exists that's looking to make our community better, or outside money that's looking to come in and improve our community. And I just don't see the nexus between $7 million and the simple task of taking care of the Capitol.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, great. Next one, Human Resources Department at 198,000.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that the Human Resource Department proposal of $198,000 meets the requirements and guidelines of the Measure N committee. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a first.
I'll second.
Mr. Prince is a second. We'll do a vote.
Chair Sanders.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard.
Yes.
Committee Member Keller is absent. Committee Member Holt.
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Yes.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland.
Yes.
Committee Member Louie.
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Keller absent.
Thank you. The next one is the City Manager's Office Strategic Initiatives at 2 million.
I will make a motion that the city manager's office and strategic initiative for $2 million be recommended to the city council, and that it does fit within the guidelines of the Measure N committee.
I'll second that motion.
Great. We have a motion and a second. We'll do a vote.
Chair Sanders.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbard.
Yes.
Committee Member Keller is absent. Committee Member Holt.
Aye.
Committee Member Perez Andreessen.
Yes.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes.
Committee Member Rowland.
Yes.
Committee Member Louie.
Aye.
Committee Member Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Keller absent.
Any
Were there-
other comments on that at all? Suggestions? I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
I was going to ask if there was comments.
Oh. Nope.
General comments.
General comments overall before we wrap up. I will just say thank you to everybody who's made it through this lengthy meeting. Sorry we couldn't keep it under 2 hours, but it's been excellent dialogue. I will just again say what a great committee this is of individuals, incredibly intelligent individuals who have they do a thorough job with their evaluation of all of the different budget items in all of their free time, which I know they have very little of. So thank you for that. Are we going to set a next meeting, or this goes now to the city council? What are next steps for this committee?
The next steps are that this does go to the city council. I think the next anticipated meeting would be to take a look at our quarterly updates on just the finances and into the next fiscal year. I would say really quickly that the feedback really important to us and really valuable. I hope that this committee can see your comments reflected in the budget in many places. Of course, there's many different voices on this committee, and so we listen to all those voices, but some of the elements like the park reimagining and the community revitalization are things that were discussed by this committee that we put into the budget. And I think some of the comments that are really important are those for individuals that are not in agreement entirely with a particular element. And so we've been taking good notes about that, and we'll do some follow-up to make sure we understand some of those concern areas and that we respond to those. And I think specific to the failed motion, that's one that we'll pay particular attention to. I would say last year there were some motions that had some dissenting votes, but all items moved forward. The first year there was the one item that was a failed motion, and so this is only, frankly, this is, or not frankly, but just pointing out, this is only the second failed motion of some 30 odd motions in the history of the committee, and so we'll take a hard look at that one. And there, of course, between now and when we propose to the city council, we'll do some homework and analysis and get council feedback based on the feedback of the committee on all items, but very particular to that item. But yeah, the next step is to take these voted on items to the city council. The next meeting of this group would be in the new fiscal year as we start thinking about mid-year.
I'd just like to say that I think that this has probably been one of the better meetings with regard to presentations. I'd like to thank the Parks and Recreation representative, the Development Services representative, Human Resources representative. I think your presentations were exceptional. They helped us to understand why we needed to approve what you were requesting, and I commend you for that. Thank you.
Seeing no other comments, the meeting is adjourned.